The human versus the alpha. A steamy werewolf shifter romance. A defiance that sparks war in a world built on submission. Prologue: The Treaty of Submission. The ancient oak stood witness to centuries of bloodshed, its gnarled roots drinking deep from soil stained with the memory of war. Beneath its sprawling canopy, two species had once torn each other apart with tooth, claw, and steel. Now, in the pale light of dawn, representatives of both worlds gathered to forge an uneasy peace. Alpha Kieran Blackthorne stood at the head of his delegation, his massive frame casting long shadows across the ceremonial clearing. His dark hair caught the morning light, and his amber eyes held the cold calculation of a predator who had never known defeat. At 28, he commanded the largest werewolf pack in the Northwestern Territories, over 300 wolves who would die at his word. Across from him, Governor Marcus Whitfield adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles with trembling fingers. The human delegation numbered only 12, their faces pale with the knowledge that they represented a species on the brink of extinction. The terms are simple. Kieran's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Humans will remain within designated territories. You will not venture into our lands without permission. In return, we cease our hunts. Governor Whitfield swallowed hard. And the tribute? Each settlement will provide one female between the ages of 16 and 25 annually. They will serve the pack as needed. Kieran's lips curved in what might have been a smile on a gentler face. Consider it insurance for your continued survival. The Treaty of Submission was signed that day in blood, human blood, willingly given, and werewolf blood, marking an oath that would bind both species for generations to come. What began as survival became law. What started as desperation evolved into tradition. For 50 years, the treaty held. Until the day Sera Nightwood chose love over duty, and a human dared to challenge an alpha for the right to claim his mate. Chapter 1: The Forbidden Territory. 23 years after the Treaty of Submission was signed, Sera Nightwood ran through the forest with the grace of her wolf and the urgency of a woman fleeing her destiny. The ancient pines whispered secrets as she passed, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even the afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the gloom. She shouldn't be here, not in the borderlands where human scent still lingered like a forbidden perfume. As the alpha's chosen mate, her place was at the pack compound, learning the subtle arts of dominance and submission that would make her a worthy Luna. Instead, she found herself drawn again and again to this edge of their world, where the wild things roamed free and the weight of expectation couldn't follow. Her wolf form was magnificent, larger than most females, with a coat of silver-touched black that caught moonlight like captured stars. But today she ran on two legs, her long dark hair streaming behind her as she vaulted fallen logs and navigated treacherous ravines with supernatural ease. The scent hit her first. Human. Male. And something else, something that made her wolf stir with interest rather than predatory hunger. Sera slowed, her enhanced senses cataloging every detail, the sharp tang of metal tools, the earthiness of honest labor, the faint sweetness of flowers. She crept closer, moving with the silent precision her kind was born to, until she could see through a break in the trees to the valley below. There, in a clearing that should have been empty, someone had built a garden. The human male tending it was nothing like the tributes brought to the pack, those broken creatures who arrived with downcast eyes and trembling hands. This man worked with his back straight, his movements confident despite the solitude. His brown hair was sun-streaked and longer than pack law would have permitted, curling slightly at his neck. When he straightened to wipe sweat from his brow, Sera caught sight of intelligent green eyes and a face marked by both kindness and quiet strength. He was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, untamed and belonging to no one but himself. Sera's breath caught. She had never seen a human like this, never imagined one could exist. The tributes were chosen for their malleability, their willingness to submit. This man radiated a fierce independence that called to something deep in her soul. She meant to turn away, to return to the compound and forget this moment of weakness. Instead, she found herself stepping into the clearing. The human's head snapped up at her approach, his body tensing for flight. But when their eyes met, something passed between them, a recognition that defied logic and law. "You shouldn't be here," Sera said, her voice carrying the authority of her bloodline. "Neither should you," he replied, and had the audacity to smile. That smile changed everything. Chapter 2: Eyes of Gold. The human didn't run. Sera stood at the edge of his impossible garden, her heart hammering against her ribs, as she studied the man who should have been cowering in terror. Instead, he straightened to his full height, tall for a human though still several inches shorter than she, and met her gaze with steady green eyes. "I'm Ethan," he said, as if introductions were normal between their kinds. "Ethan Cross." "You're in pack territory," Sera replied, though her voice lacked the menace it should have carried. "Humans aren't permitted beyond the borderlands." "Are you going to report me?" His tone held curiosity rather than fear, and when he took a step closer she caught his scent more clearly, earth and growing things, underlaid with something uniquely him that made her wolf pace restlessly. She should say yes. Should shift and tear his throat out for the transgression. Should drag his corpse back to Kieran as proof of her loyalty. Instead, she found herself asking, "What is this place?" Ethan's smile returned, transforming his face. "Paradise, if you ask me. I've been working on it for 3 years. He gestured to the carefully tended rows of vegetables, the riot of wildflowers planted around the borders, the small cabin tucked into the tree line. "The soil here is perfect, rich and deep. And the morning light." He trailed off, seeming to remember who he was talking to. 3 years? Sera moved deeper into the garden, her bare feet silent on the soft earth. "The patrols should have found you." "Should have," he agreed. "But they stick to the main paths. And I'm careful." Their eyes met again, and Sera felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with her wolf's heat, and everything to do with the way this stranger looked at her. Not as Alpha Kieran's chosen mate, not as a weapon to be wielded or a prize to be claimed, but as a woman worth knowing. "What's your name?" Ethan asked softly. She shouldn't answer. Giving him her name would make this real in a way that could never be undone. But the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Sera. Sera Nightwood." Recognition flickered across his features. "Nightwood. You're?" "The Alpha's betrothed," she finished, the title tasting like ash in her mouth. "Yes." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Are you happy?" The question was so unexpected, so dangerous, that Sera actually stepped backward. "Happy?" It's a simple question. He moved closer, his hands dirty from his work but steady as he reached for her. "Are you happy, Sera Nightwood?" No one had ever asked her that. Not once in 23 years of life had anyone cared about her happiness. Her duty, yes. Her bloodline, her strength, her value to the pack, these things mattered. But her heart? She started to give the expected answer, the safe answer. But those green eyes saw too much, understood too well. "I don't know what happy feels like." Ethan's expression grew fierce, protective in a way that made her wolf whimper with longing. "Then stay," he said simply. "Let me show you." "I can't." The words were barely a whisper. "You're here now. For a moment. A stolen moment that should never have happened. Then make it count." He extended his hand, palm up, waiting for her to choose. "One afternoon, Sera? What harm could one afternoon do?" She stared at his offered hand, callous from honest work, marked with small scars from a life lived fully. It was the hand of a man who built things instead of destroying them, who nurtured life instead of taking it. Against every law, every instinct, every lesson beaten into her from childhood, Sera reached out and placed her palm against his. The moment their skin touched, electricity shot through her, not the manufactured heat of pack bonds or the dominance games Kieran played, but something pure and wild and utterly her own. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath, his fingers closing around hers as his eyes widened. "What was that?" he whispered. Sera knew, though the knowledge terrified her. It was the first stirring of something she'd been told was impossible, True mate recognition, the kind spoken of in the oldest stories. The kind that chose hearts over hierarchy. Trouble, she said honestly. That was trouble. But she didn't let go of his hand. Chapter 3, The Alpha's Command. The pack compound sprawled across 50 acres of prime territory, its buildings arranged in careful hierarchy, with the Alpha's mansion at the center and lesser wolves' homes radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. Sera had lived here all her life, but tonight the familiar walls felt like a cage. She sat in her private chambers, luxurious by pack standards, with hand-carved furniture and silk curtains that had cost more than most wolves saw in a year. Every comfort had been provided for Alpha Kieran's chosen mate, every need anticipated except the one that mattered most, the need to choose her own path. 3 days had passed since her encounter with Ethan Cross, and she hadn't been able to think of anything else. The memory of his touch haunted her dreams, the echo of his question, "Are you happy?" following her through her daily routines. She tried to convince herself it was merely curiosity about the forbidden, but her wolf knew better. Her wolf recognized what her human mind refused to acknowledge. A sharp rap at her door interrupted her brooding. "Enter," she called, already knowing who she'd find. Alpha Kieran Blackthorne filled her doorway like a storm cloud, his presence so commanding that lesser wolves literally bent their necks when he passed. At 31 he was in his absolute prime, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair and amber eyes that could strip flesh from bone with a glance. He was handsome in the way predators were handsome, all sharp edges and barely leashed violence. "Sera?" His voice rolled through her name like distant thunder. "We need to talk." She rose from her chair, her chin lifted in the subtle defiance that had been beaten out of her as a child, but never quite eliminated. "About what?" "About your recent wanderings." Kieran stepped into her room without invitation, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "Tobias says you've been spending time near the borderlands." Tobias. The pack's head scout and Kieran's most loyal enforcer. Of course he'd been watching her. Sera kept her expression neutral, though inside she cursed herself for being careless. "I like to run," she said evenly. "The forest calls to my wolf." "Does it?" Kieran moved closer, each step calculated to demonstrate his dominance. "Or is something else calling to you?" Their relationship had always been built on careful power games, his need to control matched against her refusal to be completely broken. As children, she'd been the only female strong enough to stand beside him. As adolescents, their betrothal had been formalized through ritual and pack law. As adults, they circled each other like wary predators, neither willing to show weakness. But something had changed in her since meeting Ethan, something that made Kieran's proximity feel suffocating rather than merely annoying. "You're my alpha," Sera said carefully. "But you're not my mate yet. I still have the right to run where I choose." His amber eyes flashed with dangerous humor. "Do you? How interesting." He reached out to trail one finger along her jaw, his touch possessive and cold. "And here I thought we'd moved past such childish defiance." Sera forced herself not to flinch away, though her skin crawled at the contact. "The mating ceremony isn't for another month." "No," Kieran agreed, his voice dropping to a purr that held more threat than promise. "But that doesn't mean I'm not already invested in your well-being. Your safety. Your loyalty." The unspoken threat hung between them like a blade. Sera had seen what happened to pack members who disappointed their alpha. Some disappeared entirely. Others remained as broken examples of what happened when wolves forgot their place. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, meeting his gaze directly despite the risk. "Haven't you?" Kieran's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Then you won't mind if I increase your security detail. For your protection, of course." "That's not necessary. I'll be the judge of what's necessary for my future mate." His fingers tightened on her jaw just shy of bruising. "You're valuable, Sera. Too valuable to risk on foolish adventures. Surely you understand that." She understood perfectly. The message was clear: stay in line or face consequences she might not survive. Of course, Alpha, she said, the words tasting like poison. Kieran studied her face for a long moment, searching for cracks in her composure. When he found none, his grip loosened, and his expression shifted to something that might have passed for affection on a less dangerous face. Good. I knew you'd see reason. He leaned down to brush his lips against her forehead, a gesture that felt more like marking territory than showing tenderness. Sweet dreams, my dear. Tomorrow we have the pack assembly, and I want you at your best. He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like a countdown to war. Sera remained motionless until the sound faded completely, then sank back into her chair with shaking hands. The pack assembly. Once a month, Kieran gathered all the wolves under his rule to demonstrate his power and settle disputes. It was theater and tyranny combined, a reminder of who held ultimate authority in their world. But this time, something would be different. This time, Sera would be formally presented as his Luna-in-Waiting, the ceremony that would begin her final transformation from woman to symbol. Unless she found the courage to stop it. Outside her window, the moon hung like a question mark in the star-scattered sky. Somewhere beyond the compound walls, Ethan Cross was probably tending his impossible garden, building beauty in a world that rewarded only strength. Sera closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to see him again. Chapter 4: Breaking Point. Sera waited until the compound settled into the deep quiet of pre-dawn before making her move. The guards Kieran had assigned her were skilled, but they expected threats from outside, not rebellion from within. She slipped from her chambers like mist, using every trick of stealth her training had taught her. The forest welcomed her with familiar shadows and whispered secrets. She ran on silent feet, her heart hammering with more than exertion, as she navigated the treacherous path to Ethan's sanctuary. What was she doing? This madness could cost her everything, her position, her pack, possibly her life. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was slow death by degrees, watching herself disappear piece by piece until nothing remained but the hollow shell Kieran needed to legitimize his rule. She found Ethan where she'd hoped she would, in his garden, working by moonlight with the patient dedication of a man who understood growing things. He looked up at her approach, and his face transformed with a smile that made her chest ache. I wasn't sure you'd come back, he said, setting aside his tools. I wasn't sure either. Sera moved toward him like a moth drawn to flame, unable to resist the pull despite knowing it might destroy her. I shouldn't be here. But you are? Ethan studied her face in the silver light, and whatever he saw there made his expression grow soft with concern. What's wrong? Everything, she wanted to say. Everything is wrong and has been wrong for so long, I forgot what right felt like until I met you. Instead, she said, tell me about happiness. You said you'd show me. Ethan's smile returned, gentler this time. Happiness isn't something you can explain, he said, moving closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. It's something you have to feel. I don't know how. Then let me teach you. He extended his hand as he had 3 days ago, palm up, waiting for her choice. Trust me, Sera. Just for tonight, trust someone who wants nothing from you but the chance to make you smile. The words broke something inside her chest, some carefully constructed wall that had been holding back years of loneliness and longing. Before she could second-guess the decision, she placed her hand in his. The electricity was stronger this time, racing up her arm and settling somewhere deep in her core. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers as he sucked in a sharp breath, his green eyes widening with wonder. Every time, he whispered. Every time we touch, it's like coming home, Sera finished, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. They stared at each other in the moonlight, both of them trembling with the magnitude of what they'd acknowledged. This wasn't just attraction or curiosity or forbidden fruit. This was recognition at the deepest possible level. Soul calling to soul across the impossible divide of species and circumstance. Show me, Sera whispered. Show me what happiness feels like. Ethan didn't speak. Instead, he led her deeper into his garden, to a small grove where wildflowers grew in careful profusion around a clear spring. The water reflected the moon's light like scattered diamonds, and the air was sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. "This is my favorite place," he said quietly. "When the world gets too heavy, I come here and remember that beautiful things can grow even in darkness." Sera knelt by the water's edge, trailing her fingers through the cool current. "It's perfect." "Not perfect," Ethan corrected, settling beside her. "But real. And sometimes real is more valuable than perfect." She looked at him then, really looked, memorizing every line of his face in case this was the last time she'd be allowed such a privilege. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" "Should I be? I could kill you without breaking stride. My wolf is stronger than any human, faster than any weapon you could wield against me." "Is that what you want to do?" Ethan asked calmly. "Kill me?" "No." The word came out more vehement than she'd intended. "No, the opposite. I want to protect you, which makes no sense because you're human and I'm..." "What? A weapon? A prize to be claimed?" Ethan's voice held an edge of anger that surprised her. "You're a woman, Sera. A woman who deserves to be loved for who she is, not what she represents." The word love hung between them like a prayer and a curse. Sera's wolf whimpered with longing, while her human mind reeled with the implications. "Love is a luxury I can't afford," she said finally. "Then don't afford it," Ethan replied, reaching up to cup her face with his free hand. "Steal it. Take it like you took this moment, this night. Take it because you deserve it." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Sera's eyes fluttered closed at the gentleness of the touch. When was the last time someone had touched her without wanting to possess or control her? When had anyone ever looked at her with such tender reverence? "One kiss," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Just one so I'll know." "Know what?" "What I'm giving up." Ethan's hand stilled against her cheek. "You don't have to give up anything." "Yes, I do." Sera opened her eyes, letting him see the pain she usually kept hidden. "Tomorrow night is the pack assembly. Kieran will formally present me as his Luna-in-waiting. After that there's no going back. Then come away with me." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "Leave with me," Ethan said urgently, both hands framing her face now. "Tonight, right now. We'll go somewhere he can't follow, somewhere the pack laws don't matter. He'd hunt us to the ends of the earth. You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand that you're dying inside." Ethan's voice broke with the intensity of his emotion. "I can see it in your eyes, Sera. Whatever life you're going back to, it's killing you piece by piece." She wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He was right. She was dying, had been dying for years, suffocating under the weight of others' expectations. "I can't," she whispered. "If I run, he'll take his rage out on the pack. Innocent wolves will suffer because of my selfishness." "And what about your suffering?" Ethan demanded. "When does that matter?" Sera had no answer for that, because in her world it didn't. Individual happiness was always sacrificed for the greater good, personal desires subordinated to pack needs. She was just another casualty in an endless war between duty and desire. "Kiss me," she said instead of explaining. "Please. Let me have this one thing before I lose everything." Ethan searched her eyes for a long moment, and whatever he saw there made his expression crumble with grief and desperate love. "Sera? Please." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to remember all the reasons this was impossible. But Sera had spent her entire life being reasonable, being careful, being what others needed her to be. Tonight, she chose what she needed. When their lips met, the world exploded into sensation. This wasn't the brutal claiming she'd expected from her future with Kieran. This was reverence and tenderness, and a heat that built slowly like dawn breaking over mountains. Ethan kissed her like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was everything he'd ever wanted wrapped in skin and moonlight. And for the first time in her life, Sera Nightwood felt truly alive. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate with the knowledge of impending loss. Ethan's arms came around her, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest while her hands tangled in his hair to hold him close. She could taste his devotion, feel his love like a living thing between them, and it was more intoxicating than any drug. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together as they tried to memorize this moment. "I love you," Ethan whispered against her lips. "I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Sera. I love your strength and your sadness, and the way you look at the world like you're seeing it for the first time." The words shattered her heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. "I love you too," she whispered back, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. "God help me, I love you too." They held each other in the jasmine-scented darkness, two souls who'd found their match at exactly the wrong time. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the night wind, came the sound of howls, search parties looking for their missing Luna. Sera pulled away from Ethan's embrace, her wolf already responding to the pack call despite her human heart's desperate protests. "I have to go," she said, though every word felt like swallowing glass. "Sera, wait." But she was already shifting, her human form dissolving into silver and shadow as her wolf took control. The last thing she saw was Ethan's face, stricken with loss and love, and the terrible understanding that this might be goodbye. She ran toward the howls, toward her cage, toward a future that would slowly kill everything she'd just discovered about herself. Behind her, Ethan Cross stood alone in his garden, watching the woman he loved disappear into a world that would never let her go. The war between love and duty had begun. Chapter 5: Blood Moon Rising. The pack assembly hall thrummed with barely contained energy, as 300 wolves gathered under the vaulted ceiling carved from ancient oak. Sera stood on the raised dais beside Kieran's ornate chair, her hands folded and her face a mask of serene composure. Inside her, wolf paced frantically, still drunk on Ethan's scent and the memory of his touch. She wore the traditional Luna regalia, a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her curves, and a silver circlet that marked her as the Alpha's chosen. To the assembled pack, she looked every inch the perfect mate, beautiful, powerful, and utterly devoted to their leader. If only they knew how desperately she wanted to run. Kieran rose from his chair, and the hall fell silent with the weight of absolute authority. He was magnificent in his power, dressed in black leather that emphasized his predatory grace, his amber eyes scanning the crowd with the cold calculation of a born ruler. "My pack," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "Tonight we celebrate not just our continued dominance over this territory, but the future of our bloodline." Scattered applause rippled through the assembly. Sera kept her breathing steady, her expression neutral, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "As you know, the moon turns red tomorrow night, a blood moon sacred to our kind and blessed by the ancients." Kieran's hand settled on Sera's shoulder, his fingers tightening just enough to bruise. "It will mark the beginning of my mating ceremony with Sera Nightwood, daughter of our fallen warriors, keeper of the old bloodlines." More applause, louder this time. Several wolves began howling their approval, the sound echoing through the hall like a war cry. Sera's wolf whimpered at the noise, remembering another sound entirely, Ethan's voice whispering words of love in jasmine-scented darkness. "But before we celebrate our future," Kieran continued, his voice taking on a darker edge, "we must address a threat to our present." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Sera felt the shift like a physical thing, her enhanced senses cataloging the sudden spike of fear and aggression in the air. Something was wrong. "It has come to my attention," Kieran said, his amber eyes finding and holding hers, "that someone has been trespassing on pack lands. A human, bold enough to build a settlement in our territory without permission." "No? Oh God, no." Sera's composure cracked for just an instant, a brief widening of her eyes, a sharp intake of breath that only Kieran was close enough to hear. But it was enough. His smile turned predatory as he leaned closer to whisper in her ear. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Terror flooded her system, cold and viscous as poisoned honey. "Kieran?" Silence. His fingers dug deeper into her shoulder. "You'll speak when I give you permission." He straightened, addressing the pack once more. "This human's presence cannot be tolerated. He represents everything our kind stands against: weakness masquerading as strength, chaos disguised as order." Kieran's voice rose with righteous fury. "Tomorrow night, after the blood moon rises and my bond with your Luna is sealed, we will hunt this trespasser. We will remind the human settlements what happens to those who forget their place." The hall erupted in bloodthirsty cheers. Sera watched in horror as her packmates transformed from civilized beings into a mob thirsting for violence. These were wolves she'd known her entire life, had trained beside and laughed with and considered family. Now they bayed for the blood of an innocent man whose only crime was showing her kindness. "Alpha," a voice called from the crowd. Tobias, the head scout, stepped forward with the confident swagger of a wolf secure in his leader's favor. "Some of us have wondered if this human had help in avoiding our patrols for so long." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Sera's heart stopped beating entirely as Kieran's smile grew wider. "An excellent point, Tobias. What do you think, my dear?" Kieran's hand moved from her shoulder to her throat, his fingers resting against her pulse point. "Could this human have had assistance from one of our own?" Every eye in the hall turned to her. 300 predators studying her face, her posture, her scent for any sign of deception. Sera had trained for moments like this her entire life, had learned to lie with her expression while her mind screamed the truth. But she'd never had to lie about love before. Never had to pretend that her heart wasn't being carved from her chest with a dull blade. "I wouldn't know," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I've never encountered any humans in the forest." It was technically true. She'd encountered one human. Just one. The most important person in her suddenly narrow world. Kieran studied her face with the patience of a hunter waiting for his prey to make a mistake. "Of course not," he said finally. "You're far too loyal for such foolishness. Aren't you, my love?" The endearment was a blade wrapped in silk. "Yes, Alpha." "Good." Kieran released her throat and turned back to address the assembly. "The matter is settled. Tomorrow night we hunt. Tonight we celebrate." The hall exploded into revelry, wolves shifting between human and animal forms, voices raised in ancient songs, bodies moving to rhythms older than civilization. It should have been beautiful, this display of her people's primal nature. Instead, it felt like a countdown to execution. Sera remained perfectly still on the dais, playing her part as the devoted Luna-in-waiting, while her mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. Could she warn Ethan? Get word to him somehow? The pack's hunt wouldn't begin until tomorrow night, which gave her almost 24 hours to find a solution. But what solution could there be? Ethan was human, slower, weaker, unable to match werewolf senses or endurance. Even if she could convince him to run, Kieran would track him across continents if necessary. The Alpha's pride had been challenged, and that was a wound that could only be healed with blood. "Enjoying the festivities?" Kieran's voice was silk over steel as he settled back into his chair. "Of course, Alpha." Sera kept her eyes fixed on the celebrating crowd, not trusting herself to meet his gaze. "It's a beautiful tradition." "Indeed. Though I notice you seem distracted tonight. Are you feeling well?" The concern in his voice was perfectly crafted, the kind of solicitous attention a devoted mate might show. But Sera could hear the trap beneath the words, the invitation to reveal weakness he could exploit. "I'm simply honored by your faith in me," she replied carefully. "The responsibility of serving as Luna is not one I take lightly." "No, I'm sure you don't." Kieran's hand found her wrist, his thumb tracing patterns against her pulse. "Which is why I know you'll understand the necessity of tomorrow night's hunt. Sometimes, my dear, we must eliminate threats before they can grow into something more dangerous." Sera's breath caught as the full implications hit her. This wasn't just about Ethan's trespass, this was about her. Kieran suspected her involvement, and the hunt was as much a test of her loyalty as it was punishment for Ethan's transgression. Will you require my participation? She asked, the words scraping her throat raw. Kieran's smile was all teeth and dark promise. Oh yes, my love. Your participation will be absolutely essential. After all, what better way to prove your devotion than by helping me eliminate the threat to our bond? The blood drained from Sera's face as she understood what he was asking. Not just to stand by and watch Ethan die, but to actively participate in his murder. To hunt the man she loved like an animal, and deliver him to the Alpha who would tear him apart. I live to serve the pack, she whispered, because it was the only answer that wouldn't damn them both immediately. I know you do. Kieran lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a brand. And tomorrow night, you'll prove it to everyone. The celebration continued around them, but Sera heard none of it. Her world had narrowed to the impossible choice looming before her: save the man she loved and damn her pack to Kieran's wrath, or preserve the only family she'd ever known by destroying the only person who'd ever truly seen her. Outside the hall, the moon hung fat and silver in the star-drunk sky. Tomorrow night it would turn red with ancient power, marking the beginning of her mating ceremony and the end of everything that mattered. Unless she found the courage to choose love over duty. Unless she finally learned to put her own heart before the needs of others. Unless she was willing to risk everything for one fragile human who'd shown her what happiness could feel like. The blood moon was rising, and with it, the most important decision of Sera's life. Chapter 6: The Pack's Judgment. Dawn broke gray and sullen over the pack compound, as if the sky itself mourned what was to come. Sera hadn't slept. She'd spent the night pacing her chambers like a caged wolf, her mind cycling through increasingly desperate plans. Every scenario ended the same way, with Ethan's death or her pack's destruction. There had to be another option, some third path she couldn't see. A soft knock interrupted her frantic planning. "Enter," she called, expecting one of the servants with her morning meal. Instead, Elena Rivers slipped through the door like shadow made flesh. The pack's elderly healer moved with the careful grace of someone who'd survived 8 decades of werewolf politics, through intelligence rather than strength. Her silver hair was braided with ritual beads, and her pale blue eyes held secrets older than the compound itself. "Elena?" Sera straightened, surprised. The healer rarely visited anyone without being summoned, and never this early in the day. "Sit, child." Elena's voice carried the authority of her years, though she spoke barely above a whisper. "We need to talk before the others wake." Sera's heart lurched. "If this is about... You're human?" Elena's weathered lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Oh, my dear girl. Did you think your midnight wanderings went entirely unnoticed?" Terror flooded Sera's system. If Elena knew, how many others suspected? How long before Kieran had proof instead of just suspicion? "I don't know what you mean," Sera said carefully. Elena moved closer, her pale eyes sharp with ancient wisdom. "I was healer to your grandmother, child. I delivered your mother into this world, and held her hand when she died birthing you. I've watched you grow from a fierce pup into a woman of power, and I've seen the light slowly die in your eyes as the years passed." She reached out to cup Sera's face with hands that trembled only slightly. "Until 3 nights ago, when something changed. When you came back from the forest glowing with a life I thought you'd lost forever." Sera's composure cracked. "Elena, please." "Hush." The healer's touch was infinitely gentle. "I'm not here to judge you, Sera. I'm here to help you understand what's happening." "What do you mean?" Elena released her face and moved to the window, gazing out at the awakening compound. "Tell me, child, when you touch this human, what do you feel?" The question was so unexpected that Sera answered without thinking. "Everything. Like coming home to a place I didn't know I was looking for. Like he sees me, really sees me, not what I represent or what I can do for the pack, but me." "And your wolf? How does she respond to him?" "She?" Sera struggled to find words for the unprecedented reaction. "She's calm with him. Protective. She wants to curl up against his warmth and never move again." Elena nodded slowly. And when Alpha Kieran touches you? Sera's stomach twisted with revulsion she'd long suppressed. My wolf tries to retreat. She tolerates his presence because she must, but she doesn't welcome it. Of course she doesn't. Elena turned back to face her, and something in the old woman's expression made Sera's breath catch. Because Kieran Blackthorne is not your true mate, child. He never was. The words hit Sera like a physical blow. That's impossible. The pack elders chose us when we were children. Our bloodlines are compatible, our strengths complementary. All of which means nothing if the bond isn't genuine. Elena moved closer again, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. True mating isn't about politics or bloodlines or what serves the pack best. It's about souls recognizing their other half, hearts calling to their perfect match across impossible odds. But the ceremonies, the rituals, are powerful magic, yes. They can bind wolves together, create artificial bonds that mimic the real thing. But they're hollow echoes of true connection, shadows without substance. Elena's eyes blazed with conviction. What you found with this human, that's the real thing, Sera. That's what the ancient stories speak of. Sera sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Even if that's true, it doesn't matter. I'm bound by pack law, by duty. By fear? Elena corrected gently. And I understand that fear, child. I truly do. But there's something else you need to know, something the pack has forgotten, but I remember. She knelt beside Sera's chair, her voice becoming urgent. Your bloodline carries more than just strength and intelligence. You're descended from the first Luna, the one who could choose her mate by the calling of her heart, rather than the dictates of politics. That's just a legend. Is it? Elena's eyes glittered with dangerous knowledge. Your grandmother had visions, Sera? Dreams of a Luna who would face an impossible choice, duty or love, pack law or heart's truth. She saw a woman with your face, standing at the crossroads of destiny, holding the power to reshape everything our kind believes about mating and choice. Sera's head spun with the magnitude of what Elena was suggesting. You're talking about revolution. About overturning centuries of tradition. I'm talking about evolution, Elena corrected. About remembering what we lost when we chose political convenience over spiritual truth. She gripped Sera's hands with surprising strength. The blood moon rises tonight. If Kieran completes the mating ceremony, if he binds you through ritual and force, your true connection will be severed forever. The power in your bloodline will be subverted to his will, and you'll become exactly what he needs, a powerful puppet with no will of her own. And if I refuse? Elena's expression grew grave. Then you'll face his wrath, and likely die for your defiance. But you'll die free, Sera. You'll die as yourself, rather than as his creation. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Submit to a life of spiritual death, or risk everything for a love that might be impossible to protect. There's a third option, Sera said slowly, an idea forming in the depths of her desperation. What if I could prove Kieran isn't worthy to lead? What if I challenged his authority publicly? Elena's face went white. Challenge an alpha? Sera, that's suicide, yes. Unless I'm right about Ethan being my true mate. Unless the old power in my bloodline is strong enough to protect us both. The risk is worth it. Sera stood, her decision crystallizing into adamantine resolve. If I'm going to die anyway, at least let it be for something that matters. Let it be for love. Elena stared at her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Your grandmother would be proud, she whispered. Terrified but proud. She reached into her robes, and withdrew a small vial filled with silver liquid. Moon-blessed water from the sacred spring. If you're going to attempt what I think you're planning, you'll need all the help you can get. Sera took the vial, its contents cool against her palm. What do I do? Trust your heart, child. Trust your wolf. And remember that true power comes not from dominance, but from the courage to choose love over fear. Elena moved toward the door, then paused. The hunt begins at sunset. If you're going to act, it must be before then. Elena? Sera called softly. Why are you helping me? The old healer's smile was sad and fierce all at once. Because I loved someone once too. Someone forbidden. I chose duty over desire, and I've regretted it every day for 60 years. Her pale eyes blazed with ancient pain. Don't make my mistake, Sera. Don't let fear steal the greatest gift life can offer. She slipped away as silently as she'd come, leaving Sera alone with her impossible choice and a vial of liquid moonlight. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, marking the hours until sunset. Until the hunt began. Until Ethan Cross faced the fury of an entire pack for the crime of loving what he shouldn't. Unless Sera found the courage to rewrite the rules of their world. Chapter 7: Secrets in the Shadows. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across Ethan's garden as he worked with desperate efficiency, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at his chest. He'd heard them in the distance last night, howls echoing through the forest like promises of death. The pack knew he was here, and he had precious little time before they came for him. He should run. Every rational instinct screamed at him to abandon this place and flee as far and fast as his human limitations would allow. But rationality had nothing to do with his decision to stay. Sera would come. He was sure of it. She would try to warn him, to convince him to escape, and when she did, he'd be ready with a proposal that would either save them both or damn them completely. The sound of approaching footsteps made him straighten, his heart leaping with hope. But the figure that emerged from the tree line wasn't Sera's graceful form. It was a massive man with salt and pepper hair and eyes like winter storms. Ethan's hand closed around the handle of his gardening spade, though he knew it would be useless against a werewolf. If you're here to kill me, at least tell me your name first. The stranger's lips quirked in what might have been amusement. Marcus Nightwood, he said, his voice carrying the gravel of age and hard living. And I'm not here to kill you, boy. I'm here to talk. Nightwood. Sera's family name. Ethan studied the man more carefully, noting the strong jaw and proud bearing that echoed in Sera's features. You're her father? Uncle, actually. Her father died defending the pack when she was still in diapers. Marcus moved closer, his predatory grace unmistakable despite his human form. But I raised her after her mother died in childbirth. I'm the closest thing to a father she's ever known. Ethan's grip on the spade relaxed slightly. Then you know why I can't leave. Because you love her. There was no mockery in Marcus's tone, just a weary sort of understanding. Yes, I know. The question is whether you love her enough to let her go. Let her go? Ethan's voice cracked with the impossibility of it. She's dying in that place. I can see it in her eyes. She's suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations. How can you ask me to abandon her to that? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying Ethan with the intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Someone weaker. Someone who'd run at the first sign of real danger. Marcus settled onto a fallen log, with the careful movements of a man whose body had seen too much violence. Instead, I find a man foolish enough to stay and face certain death for a woman he's known less than a week. Love doesn't follow a timeline, Ethan said simply. Sometimes it takes years to build. Sometimes it happens in a heartbeat. What matters isn't how long it takes, it's how real it is when it arrives. And you think what you have with Sera is real? I know it is. Ethan set aside his gardening tools and faced Marcus directly. When I touch her, something settles in my chest, something I didn't even realize was restless until it found peace. When she looks at me, I see recognition, like she's been waiting her whole life for me to find her. He laughed, the sound cracked with desperation. I know how insane that sounds, especially coming from a human talking about a werewolf, but... It doesn't sound insane, Marcus interrupted quietly. It sounds like true mating. Ethan blinked in surprise. True mating. An old concept, one most of our kind have forgotten in favor of political alliances and bloodline preservation. Marcus's expression grew distant with memory. The idea that souls are created in pairs, destined to find each other across impossible odds. When true mates connect, the bond is unbreakable, stronger than pack law, more powerful than alpha commands. Hope flared in Ethan's chest, bright and desperate. Then there's a chance? Some way for us to be together? Marcus's smile was grim. There's always a chance, boy. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price for it. What price? Everything. Marcus stood, his massive frame blocking out the afternoon sun. If you're truly Sera's mate, then claiming her means challenging Kieran Blackthorne directly. Not just for his betrothal rights, but for his authority over the pack. You'd be declaring war on everything our society is built on. Ethan's throat went dry. A human challenging an alpha werewolf. That's suicide. Most likely, yes. Marcus's honesty was brutal. But not certainly. The old laws, the ones that predate the Treaty of Submission, they recognize true mating bonds. If you could prove your connection to Sera, if you could demonstrate that your claim supersedes Kieran's political arrangement. How? Ethan demanded. How does a human prove anything to a pack of wolves? Marcus studied him for another long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. There's a ritual. Ancient, dangerous, and forbidden by current pack law. It's called the claiming trial. What does it involve? 3 challenges, designed to test the strength of your bond and your worthiness as a mate. If you succeed in all 3, the pack must acknowledge your claim. If you fail? Marcus shrugged. Well, failure tends to be permanent in these situations. Ethan's mind raced through the implications. It was a long shot, worse than a long shot. But it was also the only path he could see that didn't end with either Sera's spiritual death or his own physical one. What are the challenges? He asked. The trial of strength, you must prove you can protect what you claim to love. The trial of heart, you must demonstrate the depth of your connection. And the trial of sacrifice, you must show you're willing to pay any price for your mate's happiness, even if that price is your own life. And if I invoke this ritual, Kieran has to honor it? If it's invoked correctly, in front of the full pack, under the light of a blood moon. Marcus nodded grimly. Even Kieran Blackthorne wouldn't dare ignore laws that old. The pack would turn on him if he tried. Ethan stared out at his garden, this place of impossible beauty he'd carved from the wilderness through patience and hope. In a few hours, it would likely be destroyed, along with everything else he'd built. But maybe if he was brave enough and strong enough and lucky enough, something better could grow from the ashes. How do I invoke the ritual? He asked. Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth Ethan had seen from the older man. You don't, boy. Sera does. The challenge must be issued by the contested mate herself, in defiance of her assigned alpha. Ethan's heart sank. Then it's impossible. She'd never risk the pack's safety for her own happiness. Wouldn't she? Marcus's eyes glittered with dangerous knowledge. My niece has spent her entire life putting others' needs before her own. But people can only sacrifice themselves for so long before something breaks. He moved toward the tree line, then paused. The pack assembly begins at sunset. If Sera is going to act, it will be tonight. Be ready, Ethan Cross. If this works, you're going to need every ounce of courage you possess. He melted back into the forest like a shadow, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of impossible hope. The sun continued its relentless march toward the horizon, marking the hours until everything he loved would be put to the ultimate test. In the distance, carried on the evening wind, came the sound of wolves howling their hunger for the hunt. Chapter 8: The Human Rebellion. The blood moon hung like a wound in the star-scattered sky, as the pack assembled in the ancient ceremonial circle, deep in the forest. Sera stood beside Kieran at the circle's center, wearing the traditional mating dress of white silk that marked her as a bride about to be claimed. Around them, 300 wolves formed concentric rings of power and expectation, their eyes reflecting the crimson moonlight like scattered garnets. She should be terrified. Should be paralyzed with fear at what she was about to attempt. Instead, she felt an unnatural calm settling over her bones, as if her grandmother's spirit was whispering strength into her soul. The vial Elena had given her was tucked against her heart, its weight a reminder that some bonds ran deeper than politics or fear. On the other hand, she clutched a small wildflower, jasmine from Ethan's garden, its sweet scent a tangible connection to the love that had awakened her from a lifetime of sleepwalking. "My pack?" Kieran began, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd. "Tonight, under the sacred blood moon, we witness the joining of two powerful bloodlines. Tonight, Sera Nightwood becomes Luna of the Shadow Creek Pack, bound to me by ritual and law." Approval rippled through the crowd, howls and yips and the stamp of feet on consecrated ground. They were beautiful in their unity, these people she'd called family her entire life. It broke her heart to know that what she was about to do might destroy that unity forever. "The ceremony is ancient," Kieran continued, beginning the ritual words that would bind them together for life. "As old as the first wolves who learned to walk upright, as sacred as the moon herself. Let all who witness this union know that what is joined here cannot be sundered by mortal will or desire." He turned to face her, his amber eyes blazing with triumph and possessive hunger. This was his moment of ultimate victory, claiming not just a mate, but the most powerful bloodline in the pack. With Sera bound to him, his rule would be unquestionable, his legacy assured. "Sera Nightwood," he said formally, extending his hand to her. "Do you accept the bond between us? Do you pledge your heart, your body, your wolf to my keeping?" The circle fell silent, 300 predators holding their collective breath as they waited for the words that would seal her fate. Sera looked at Kieran's outstretched hand, strong and scarred from countless battles, the hand of a born ruler who'd never learned the difference between strength and cruelty. Then she looked past him, past the assembled pack, to where a solitary figure stood at the circle's edge. Ethan. He shouldn't be here. Should have run the moment Marcus warned him what was coming. Instead, he'd come to witness her choice, to support her even if it meant watching her bind herself to another man forever. The sight of him, so much smaller than the surrounding wolves, so obviously human and fragile and brave, shattered the last of her carefully constructed composure. He was here because he loved her. Because he believed in her strength, even when she didn't believe in it herself. It was time to prove he was right. "No," Sera said clearly, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "I do not accept the bond between us." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Wolves surged to their feet with snarls of outrage and confusion. Several began shifting, their human forms dissolving into fur and fang, as primal instincts overrode civilized thought. Kieran's face went through a spectrum of emotions, surprise, rage, and something that might have been fear before he regained control. "You're overwrought," he said in the tone one might use to calm a hysterical child. "The significance of this moment has overwhelmed you. Perhaps we should—" "I am not overwrought," Sera interrupted, her wolf rising to support her human resolve. "I am making a choice. The first real choice of my life." She turned to face the assembled pack, drawing strength from Elena's encouraging nod and her Uncle Marcus's fierce pride. "I invoke the ancient law of true mating," she called out, her voice carrying over the growing chaos. "I challenge the validity of this political arrangement and claim the right to choose my own mate." The howls of outrage grew deafening. Someone, she thought it was Tobias, shouted that she'd lost her mind. Others demanded she be forcibly sedated, until she came to her senses. But underneath the chaos, Sera heard something else, the whispered discussions of the pack elders, the wolves old enough to remember laws that predated modern convenience. "There is no such law," Kieran snarled, his careful composure finally cracking. "You belong to me, Sera. You were promised to me before you could walk, bound to me by every tradition our people hold sacred." "Traditions change," Sera replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "But some truths are eternal. The right to choose love over duty. The right to follow your heart, instead of others' expectations. The right to claim a true mate bond, over a political arrangement." She pulled the vial of moon-blessed water from her dress and held it aloft, its silver contents gleaming in the crimson light. I call upon the old laws, the ones written when wolves still remembered that love was stronger than power. I claim the right of claiming trial. The pack fell silent with shock. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the implications of her words sank in. Claiming trial, one of the elders whispered, his ancient voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. I haven't heard those words in 70 years. Because it's forbidden? Kieran snapped, though Sera could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Outlawed for good reason. The ritual is barbaric, outdated. The ritual is recognized by laws older than your rule, Sera cut him off. She raised the vial higher, letting its light catch every watching eye. I invoke claiming trial for the right to choose my true mate. Let any who would contest my choice step forward and face the ancient tests. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, from the edge of the circle, came the sound of approaching footsteps. Ethan Cross walked into the ceremonial space with the steady courage of a man who'd already accepted his death. He was dressed simply, jeans and a white shirt that made him look even more fragile surrounded by supernatural predators. But his green eyes blazed with determination, and when he reached Sera's side, his hand found hers with unwavering certainty. The contact sent electricity shooting through her bones, so powerful that several nearby wolves actually stepped back in surprise. The moon-blessed water in her vial began to glow brighter, responding to the strength of their connection. I am Ethan Cross, he said, his human voice somehow carrying as clearly as any werewolf's enhanced speech. I claim Sera Nightwood as my true mate, bound not by politics or bloodlines, but by the recognition of souls meant to be joined. The pack erupted into chaos once more, but this time Kieran's roar of fury cut through the noise like a blade. You dare? He began to shift, his human form blurring as his wolf demanded blood. You pathetic human scum dare to claim what is mine? She was never yours, Ethan replied calmly, though Sera could feel the tremor in his hand. You can't own a soul, Kieran. You can't possess a heart that belongs to someone else. Kieran's shift completed, leaving a massive black wolf with amber eyes blazing with murderous rage where the man had stood. He crouched to spring, every muscle coiled for the killing strike that would end this insult permanently. Stop. The voice that cut through the night wasn't Sera's, it was Elena Rivers, supported by two younger wolves as she stepped into the circle. The claiming trial has been properly invoked. By law, you must honor it. What law? Kieran snarled, though he didn't attack. Show me the statute that says I have to indulge this madness. Elena smiled with the satisfied expression of someone who'd spent 70 years waiting for this moment. The Moonstone Codex, Section 3, Subsection 7. When true mating bonds are claimed in defiance of political arrangements, the contested mate may invoke claiming trial to prove the validity of their choice. Such trials must be completed under blood moonlight with the full pack as witness. She produced an ancient leather-bound book from her robes, its pages yellow with age and crackling with power. The law was written by the first Alpha, sealed with his blood and blessed by the moon goddess herself. It supersedes any rule you've made, Kieran Blackthorne, no matter how long you've ruled. Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves, some outraged, others fascinated, all of them recognizing the binding power of laws that old. Kieran's wolf form trembled with barely restrained violence, but even he couldn't ignore centuries of legal precedent. Fine, he snarled, his voice distorted by his partially shifted form. Let them attempt their trial. When this human fails and dies, as he inevitably will, perhaps the pack will finally understand the folly of challenging established order. He shifted back to human form with obvious effort, his amber eyes promising that Ethan's death would be neither quick nor merciful. Elena nodded formally. The claiming trial is accepted. 3 challenges must be completed before dawn breaks the blood moon's power. Should the challenger succeed in all 3, his claim will be recognized and the contested mate will be free to choose. Should he fail? She shrugged. Failure is typically fatal. Sera's hand tightened around Ethan's, her wolf howling with fear and pride in equal measure. He'd done it. Against all logic and reason, he'd forced the pack to acknowledge their bond, Now all he had to do was survive the next few hours. "What is the first challenge?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he'd undertaken. Elena smiled, and for the first time all evening it held genuine warmth. "The trial of strength," she announced. "Prove you have the power to protect what you claim to love." Around them the pack pressed closer, their eyes gleaming with bloodthirsty anticipation. They expected to watch a human die in spectacular fashion, torn apart by challenges designed for supernatural beings. They had no idea what they were about to witness. Chapter 9, Marked by Fire. The trial of strength was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Ethan stood in the center of the ceremonial circle, unarmed and alone, while 3 of the pack's strongest warriors prepared to test his worthiness through combat. Not to the death, Elena had made that clear, but to submission, which for most humans would amount to the same thing. Kieran had chosen the challengers personally, and his selections revealed both his strategy and his cruelty. First was Tobias, the head scout whose loyalty to his alpha was matched only by his skill in battle. Second was Carla Thornwick, a massive woman whose wolf form could crack bones with casual ease. Third and most vicious of all was Derek Blackthorne, Kieran's younger brother, nearly as large as the alpha himself and twice as brutal. They circled Ethan like sharks scenting blood, their enhanced senses cataloging every sign of weakness. To them he was nothing more than fragile human meat, soft and slow and utterly outmatched. The only question was how quickly he'd break. Sera wanted to scream, to throw herself between Ethan and the certain destruction bearing down on him. But the trial laws were absolute. Any interference would invalidate his claim and forfeit both their lives. She could only watch and pray to whatever gods might care about impossible love. "The rules are ancient but clear," Elena announced to the assembled pack. "The challenger must face 3 opponents in single combat, proving his strength through victory or courage through endurance. He may not retreat from the circle, may not cry for mercy, and may not be aided by any outside force." Her pale eyes found Sera's, conveying both sympathy and warning. "The trial ends when all 3 opponents are defeated or the challenger yields." "Or dies," Derek added with vicious humor, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. Ethan stood perfectly still in the circle's center, his green eyes tracking the movements of his opponents with the careful attention of a man who understood he was about to fight for his life. He looked so small compared to the werewolf stalking him, so fragile and mortal and doomed. But there was something in his posture that made Sera's breath catch, a coiled readiness that spoke of hidden depths. This wasn't the stance of a man resigned to death. This was the stance of someone who'd prepared for exactly this moment. "Begin," Elena called, and hell erupted in the sacred circle. Tobias moved first, his enhanced speed making him little more than a blur as he closed the distance. Most humans wouldn't have even seen the attack coming, let alone had time to respond. Ethan wasn't most humans. He twisted aside with liquid grace, his movement so perfectly timed that Tobias's claws whistled past his throat by millimeters. Before the werewolf could recover, Ethan's elbow drove into his solar plexus with surgical precision, doubling him over with a grunt of surprise. The pack murmured in shock. No human should have been able to avoid that strike, let alone counter it so effectively. Carla attacked from behind while Ethan was engaged with Tobias, her massive frame moving with deceptive speed. Her claws raked across his back, tearing fabric and skin, but instead of dropping him to his knees as she'd expected, Ethan rolled with the blow and came up fighting. He spun toward her, his hands moving in patterns Sera didn't recognize but somehow found familiar. When Carla lunged again, those hands intercepted her attack with impossible accuracy, redirecting her momentum and sending her crashing into the circle's perimeter. "How?" someone in the crowd whispered. "How is he doing that?" Derek Blackthorne snarled his frustration and threw himself into the fray with berserker fury, determined to end this humiliation quickly. His claws swept in a killing arc toward Ethan's throat, a blow that should have decapitated any mortal man. Instead, Ethan ducked under the strike and drove his shoulder into Derek's midsection, lifting the much larger man off his feet and slamming him to the ground with bone-jarring force. Derek's breath exploded from his lungs as his back struck the consecrated earth, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan straightened slowly, his shirt hanging in bloody tatters but his stance still strong. 3 of the pack's finest warriors surrounded him, and for the first time in the encounter they looked uncertain. "Impossible," Kieran breathed, his amber eyes locked on the human who shouldn't have lasted 30 seconds against supernatural predators. "What are you?" Ethan's smile was grim but steady. "I'm a man in love," he said simply. "And love makes us capable of impossible things." He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the complete truth either. Sera could see it in the controlled way he moved, the strategic precision of his counters. This wasn't just desperate courage, this was skill. Training. Experience. The 3 wolves regrouped, their initial confidence replaced by wary respect. Whatever they'd expected from this human, it wasn't a trained fighter who moved like he'd studied their kind extensively. "Together," Tobias growled to his companions. "No more playing with him." They came at Ethan as a coordinated unit, 3 predators working in perfect synchronization to bring down dangerous prey. There was no honor in it, no single combat, just the pack tactics that had made werewolves apex predators for millennia. Ethan met their charge head-on, and what followed was poetry written in violence. He flowed between their attacks like water through rocks, every movement economical and devastatingly effective. When Tobias overextended, Ethan's knee drove into his ribs with surgical precision. When Carla tried to grapple, he used her own momentum to throw her over his hip. When Derek came in low, Ethan's downward elbow strike caught him between the shoulder blades and dropped him like a stone. The pack watched in stunned silence as their champions fell one by one, brought low not by superior strength, but by skill they couldn't match and determination they couldn't break. By the time the dust settled, all 3 werewolves lay groaning on the ground while Ethan stood bloodied but unbowed in the circle's center. "I yield," Tobias gasped, clutching his damaged ribs. "I yield to the human." Carla nodded her agreement, too winded to speak. Derek glared up at Ethan with hate-filled eyes but finally, grudgingly, inclined his head in acknowledgement. The silence that followed was absolute, 300 wolves struggling to process what they'd witnessed. A human, fragile, mortal, supposedly inferior, had just defeated 3 of their strongest in single combat. Elena's voice cut through the shocked quiet like a bell. "The trial of strength is complete. The challenger has proven his worthiness through victory." She looked at Ethan with something approaching awe. "Well fought, human. Very well fought indeed." Sera's heart soared with fierce pride and desperate relief. 1 challenge down, 2 to go. Ethan had survived the first test, had proven he could protect what he loved. But the next trial would be different, more dangerous in its own way than physical combat. "The trial of heart," Elena continued, consulting the ancient book in her hands. "The challenger must demonstrate the depth of his connection to the contested mate, proving the bond between them transcends mere physical attraction or political convenience." She gestured to a stone altar that had been hidden in the shadows at the circle's edge. On its surface lay an ornate chalice filled with liquid that gleamed like liquid starlight. "The draught of truth," Elena explained. "Blessed by the moon goddess herself, it strips away all pretense and deception. Those who drink from it speak only the absolute truth of their hearts, no matter how painful or dangerous that truth might be." Sera's blood went cold as she understood the implications. Under the draft's influence, Ethan would be compelled to reveal every thought, every feeling, every secret corner of his soul. If his love wasn't as deep as he claimed, if there were doubts or fears or hidden motivations, they would be exposed for all to see. Worse, the draft was known to be unpredictable. Some who drank it spoke poetry that moved listeners to tears. Others revealed such dark truths that they destroyed themselves and everyone they cared about. There was no predicting which way the draft would turn, no controlling what secrets it might expose. Ethan approached the altar without hesitation, though Sera could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew the risks as well as she did, understood that this challenge might be more dangerous than the physical combat he'd just survived. "The trial of heart requires complete honesty," Elena warned. The draft will compel you to speak the absolute truth about your feelings for Sera Nightwood. If your love is genuine, if your bond is real, the pack will recognize it. If not, she shrugged eloquently. Deception rarely survives divine intervention. Ethan lifted the chalice, its contents swirling with otherworldly light. I've never lied to Sera, he said quietly. I'm not going to start now. He drank deeply, draining the chalice in 3 long swallows. For a moment nothing happened. He stood perfectly still, the empty cup in his hands, his green eyes clear and focused. Then the magic took hold. Ethan's pupils dilated until his eyes were almost black, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in listeners' bones. The draft had claimed him, and now truth would pour from him like water from a broken dam. Sera Nightwood, he said, turning to face her across the circle. From the moment I saw you, I knew my life had been divided into 2 parts, before you and everything after. Before you, I was half alive, going through the motions of existence without understanding what I was missing. The pack leaned forward, captured by the raw honesty in his words. Even Kieran's expression had shifted from contempt to unwilling fascination. I love the way you move through the forest like you're part of it, Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I love how your eyes light up when you discover something beautiful. I love your strength and your gentleness, and the way you look at the world like you're seeing it for the first time. Sera's breath caught as his gaze found and held hers. Under the draft's influence, his emotions were laid bare, love so pure and powerful it made her wolf whimper with recognition. But more than that, Ethan said, his voice breaking with the intensity of his feelings, I love who you are when you think no one is watching. I love the woman who tends wounded birds and plants flowers in secret places. I love the person who questions everything she's been told and dreams of choosing her own path. Tears streamed down Sera's face as she heard herself described not as the Alpha's chosen mate or the pack's weapon, but as a woman worthy of love for her own sake. I would die for you, Ethan continued, the draft compelling complete honesty. I would live for you. I would spend eternity proving that you deserve to be cherished, not owned. That you deserve to be free. The words hung in the air like benediction, their truth so absolute that even the pack's most cynical members felt their power. This wasn't political maneuvering or desperate bravado, this was love in its purest form, stripped of all pretense and laid bare for the world to witness. But the draft wasn't finished with him yet. I'm also terrified, Ethan admitted, his voice growing smaller. Terrified that I'm not enough for someone like you. Terrified that my love will get you killed. Terrified that even if we survive tonight, there will always be those who see our bond as abomination instead of miracle. The honesty was brutal in its completeness. Sera could see how much it cost him to admit his fears, his doubts, his very human limitations in front of an audience that already considered him inferior. But I'm more terrified of a world without you in it, he said, his voice growing strong again. More terrified of watching you disappear into a life that kills your spirit, piece by piece. If loving you is wrong, if choosing you dooms us both, then I choose damnation with you over salvation without you. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft sound of weeping from somewhere in the crowd. Even the most hardened wolves had been moved by the raw emotion in Ethan's confession. Elena stepped forward, her ancient face soft with wonder. The trial of heart is complete, she announced. The challenger has proven the depth of his devotion beyond any possible doubt. She looked around the circle, her pale eyes challenging anyone to dispute what they'd heard. Is there any among you who would question the truth of this bond? Any who would claim that what we've witnessed is anything less than true mating? The silence stretched longer, but no challenges came. Even Kieran seemed stunned by the power of Ethan's words, his amber eyes clouded with something that might have been doubt. 2 trials completed, Elena said formally. 1 remains. The blood moon hung lower in the sky now, its crimson light painting everything in shades of war and passion. Dawn was still hours away, but Sera could feel time slipping through her fingers like sand. The trial of sacrifice, Elena continued, consulting the ancient text once more. The most dangerous of the 3, for it requires the challenger to prove his devotion through the ultimate test, his willingness to give up everything he values for his mate's happiness. A chill ran down Sera's spine as she read the implications in Alina's expression. This wasn't just about being willing to die for love, it was about being willing to live without it if necessary. The trial is simple in concept, Elena explained, her voice heavy with regret. The challenger must choose between his own desires and his mate's well-being. He must prove that his love is selfless rather than possessive, that he wants what's best for her even if it costs him everything. She gestured to two paths leading away from the ceremonial circle, one toward the forest's heart, where Ethan's garden waited in peaceful solitude, and one toward the pack compound, where duty and tradition held sway. Choose, Elena said simply. Save yourself and lose your mate, or fight for your mate and likely lose everything else. But choose knowing that true sacrifice means putting her needs before your own, even when doing so breaks your heart. Sera's breath caught as she understood the trap. If Ethan chose to flee, to save himself and abandon her to Kieran, he would be branded a coward and their bond declared false. But if he chose to stay and fight, he would face Kieran directly, alpha to human, predator to prey, with only one possible outcome. Either choice would destroy their chance at happiness, but one would destroy it through cowardice, while the other would destroy it through death. Unless there was a third option. Unless love really could work miracles. Ethan looked at the two paths, then at Sera, then at the assembled pack that held both their fates in its collective judgment. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite the impossibility of his situation. I choose neither path, he said clearly. I choose to rewrite the rules. Kieran laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You can't rewrite ancient law, human. The trial is what it is. Choose or forfeit your claim. Then I forfeit, Ethan said simply. Sera's heart shattered. Ethan, no. But, he continued, his green eyes blazing with determination, I also invoke the right of challenge. The pack erupted in shocked murmurs. Alina's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Even Kieran looked stunned by the audacity. Right of challenge, the alpha snarled. There is no such thing. You're making up laws now? Actually, Elena said slowly, flipping through the ancient tome with trembling fingers, there is such a provision. Section 7, subsection 12. Her voice grew stronger as she read. Should the trials of claiming prove inconclusive or be declared forfeit, the challenger may invoke the right of challenge, facing the contested mate's chosen alpha in single combat for the right to claim her. Single combat, Kieran repeated, his voice dripping with dark amusement. You want to fight me, human? One-on-one, no weapons, no interference? Yes, Ethan said without hesitation. I challenge you, Kieran Blackthorne, for the right to claim Sera Nightwood as my mate. Winner takes all. Sera wanted to scream, to throw herself between them, to find some way to stop this madness. Ethan had already proven himself stronger than anyone expected, but Kieran was an alpha werewolf in his prime, faster than human sight could track, stronger than steel, more vicious than any predator on Earth. It would be suicide. But as she looked at Ethan's face, saw the absolute certainty in his expression, she realized something that made her wolf sing with fierce pride. He wasn't just fighting for her anymore. He was fighting for the right of every person, human or werewolf, to choose love over duty, heart over hierarchy, hope over fear. He was fighting to prove that sometimes, love really was stronger than power. Kieran's smile was all teeth and darkness. Very well, human. I accept your challenge. He began to strip off his formal robes, revealing the powerful frame beneath. But when I'm finished with you, when your blood waters this sacred ground, Sera will understand the folly of defying natural order. The pack pressed closer, forming a tight circle around the two men who would decide their Luna's fate. Sera found herself gripping Alina's arm, her claws digging into the old woman's flesh. Can he win? She whispered desperately. Alina's smile was sad and proud and terrified all at once. Child, she said softly, he's already won. The question now is whether he'll live to enjoy his victory. The blood moon watched from above as Alpha and Human faced each other in the sacred circle. Two men who loved the same woman, preparing to fight for the right to claim her heart. Only one would walk away from this confrontation. But both had already changed the world simply by being brave enough to try. Chapter 10: Between Two Worlds. The circle had never felt smaller than it did now, with Kieran Blackthorne circling Ethan like death-given form. The Alpha moved with liquid grace, his human form deceptively calm while predatory energy coiled beneath his skin. He could shift at any moment, bringing supernatural strength and speed to bear against his merely mortal opponent. But pack law was specific about the right of challenge. Both combatants had to remain in human form until one yielded or died. It was meant to be a test of pure strength and skill, not supernatural advantage. Of course, that assumed a level playing field Ethan could never hope to achieve. "Last chance, human," Kieran said conversationally, his amber eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Walk away now, and I'll make your death quick. Stay, and I'll take my time teaching you the price of presumption." Ethan's response was to drop into a fighting stance that made Sera's breath catch with recognition. It was wolf pack positioning, the way their kind prepared for combat when human form was required. But how could a human know their fighting techniques? "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said quietly. "Sera deserves better than a mate who rules through fear." Kieran's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Fear? You think I rule through fear?" He spread his arms wide, encompassing the watching pack. "Look around you, human. See the faces of my wolves. Do you see fear, or do you see respect?" Ethan did look, and what he saw made his stomach clench with understanding. The pack wasn't watching their alpha with terrified obedience, they were watching with genuine loyalty, the kind that came from years of successful leadership. Kieran might be ruthless, but he'd kept them safe, strong, and prosperous. Which made him all the more dangerous. "Respect earned through strength I can understand," Ethan said carefully. "But what happens when that strength is used to crush rather than protect? What happens when the alpha's will becomes more important than the pack's well-being?" "The alpha's will is the pack's well-being," Kieran snarled, his composure finally cracking. "I've kept them alive for over a decade, led them through territorial wars that would have destroyed lesser packs. And you, a human who's existed in our world for less than a week, think you understand leadership better than I do?" He moved without warning, his enhanced speed making him blur across the distance between them. But Ethan was ready, had been reading the micro-expressions and muscle tensions that preceded the attack. He twisted aside with economical grace, letting Kieran's momentum carry him past before striking out with precise, measured force. His elbow caught Kieran in the ribs, not hard enough to cause serious damage, but sufficient to make the alpha grunt with surprise. No human should have been able to track that movement, let alone counter it so effectively. "Impossible," someone in the crowd whispered. "How is he keeping up?" Sera watched the exchange with growing wonder and terror. Ethan was holding his own against an alpha werewolf, matching supernatural reflexes with skill she was beginning to recognize. Those movements, those techniques, they were pack fighting methods, but refined beyond anything she'd seen. Kieran recovered quickly, his amber eyes now bright with genuine interest rather than casual contempt. "What are you?" he demanded, circling more warily now. "You're not just some random human. No one moves like that without training." "I'm someone who spent 5 years learning everything I could about werewolf combat techniques," Ethan replied honestly. "Someone who knew that loving Sera might someday require me to prove myself worthy of her." The admission sent shock waves through the assembled pack. 5 years? He'd been preparing for this moment since before he'd even met her? "You've been studying us," Kieran said, and there was a new note in his voice, respect, grudging but real. "Planning this?" "Not planning," Ethan corrected, dodging another lightning-fast strike. "Hoping. Preparing for the possibility that someone like her might exist, that I might be lucky enough to find her." His counterattack was a thing of beauty, a combination of strikes that flowed together like lethal poetry. But Kieran was an alpha for good reason, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to block most of the damage while launching his own devastating response. They fought across the circle with skill that left the watching pack breathless, human determination, matched against supernatural ability, in a display that would be spoken of for generations. Ethan's technique was flawless, his strategy brilliant, but Kieran's raw power was beginning to tell. Blood flowed from cuts on both combatants, but Kieran's wounds were already healing, while Ethan's remained open and bleeding. It was a war of attrition that could only end one way. Unless Ethan found an advantage that went beyond mere physical prowess. "You know what the real tragedy is?" Ethan said as they grappled in the circle's center, both men straining against each other with everything they possessed. "You could have been a great alpha. Your pack does love you, does trust you to keep them safe. But you've forgotten that true strength comes from lifting others up, not holding them down." Kieran's eyes flashed with rage. "Don't presume to lecture me about leadership, human. I've kept this pack alive through wars you can't imagine, threats that would have destroyed everyone you care about," Ethan finished. "I know. And I respect that. But somewhere along the way, you started seeing pack members as possessions instead of people. Sera isn't a prize to be claimed, Kieran. She's a woman who deserves the right to choose her own fate." "Choice is a luxury predators can't afford," Kieran snarled, breaking their grapple with a move that sent Ethan stumbling backward. "We survive through unity, through hierarchy, through absolute loyalty to the pack's needs." "Whose needs?" Ethan pressed, even as he fought to maintain his defensive posture. "The pack's or yours? Because from where I'm standing, forcing Sera into a mating she doesn't want serves your ambition, not their well-being." The words hit home with devastating accuracy. Sera could see it in the way Kieran's expression faltered, in the brief moment of uncertainty that flickered across his features. For just an instant, the Alpha's absolute certainty wavered. It was all the opening Ethan needed. He moved with liquid speed, his entire body becoming a weapon as he closed the distance between them. But instead of striking to wound or subdue, he did something unprecedented, something that froze every werewolf in the circle with shock. He embraced Kieran. Not a grapple or a hold, but an actual embrace, the kind shared between brothers or packmates, full of warmth and understanding and fierce affection. "I don't want to destroy you," Ethan said quietly, his words meant for Kieran alone but carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "I want to save you. From the loneliness of ruling through fear, from the isolation of never being seen as anything but an alpha, from the tragedy of loving someone who can't love you back." Kieran stood frozen in the embrace, his entire worldview crashing down around him. No enemy had ever held him like this. No challenger had ever offered him understanding, instead of hatred. "You deserve better than a mate who's been forced into your arms," Ethan continued. "You deserve someone who chooses you freely, who sees past your power to the man underneath. Sera could never be that person, but someone else could. Someone who would love the Alpha and the man with equal devotion." For a moment that stretched like eternity, the two men stood locked together in the sacred circle, predator and prey, supernatural and human, enemy and unexpected ally. Around them, the pack watched in breathless silence as everything they thought they understood about strength and power shifted on its axis. Then Kieran pulled back, his amber eyes bright with unshed tears and something that might have been gratitude. "You would have made a good wolf," he said quietly. "And you could still make a great alpha," Ethan replied. "One who rules through inspiration, instead of intimidation." The blood moon watched from above as two men who should have been mortal enemies, found understanding in the most unlikely place. But the trial wasn't over yet, and pack law still demanded a victor. "I yield," Kieran said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the circle. "I yield the challenge, and relinquish my claim to Sera Nightwood." The words hit the assembled pack like a physical blow. Their alpha, the strongest, most dominant wolf they'd ever known, had just surrendered to a human. Not through defeat in battle, but through something far more powerful. Through the recognition that love couldn't be forced, only freely given. Sera felt her knees give out, as the magnitude of what had happened crashed over her. Ethan had won. Not just the trial, not just the right to claim her, but something infinitely more precious. He'd won the respect of her people and the acknowledgement that their bond was real. Elena stepped forward, her ancient voice ringing with wonder and joy. "The rite of challenge is complete," she announced. "The trials are concluded. By ancient law and sacred tradition, I declare Ethan Cross the victor and recognize his claim to Sera Nightwood as true mate." The pack erupted in howls of celebration, some confused, some amazed, but all of them acknowledging the power of what they'd witnessed. A human had defeated their alpha not through superior strength, but through superior heart. Ethan turned toward Sera, his green eyes blazing with love and exhaustion and desperate hope. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, swaying on his feet from the effort of fighting beyond human limits, but he'd never looked more beautiful to her. She ran to him across the sacred circle, her wolf singing with joy as their bond blazed to life unimpeded by law or tradition. When she threw herself into his arms, the contact sent lightning through both their bodies, the recognition of true mates finally free to claim each other. But even as they held each other in the moonlight, surrounded by the pack's celebration, Sera knew their troubles were far from over. They'd won the right to be together, but they still had to figure out how to live in a world that would struggle to accept their unprecedented bond. The blood moon was setting, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The hardest part was still to come. Chapter 11: The Alpha's Weakness. 3 days after the blood moon trials, the pack compound buzzed with nervous energy, as wolves struggled to adapt to their new reality. Kieran Blackthorne remained their alpha, his authority unquestioned despite his unexpected surrender, but everything else had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Sera stood at the window of her chambers, watching the controlled chaos in the courtyard below. Training sessions had resumed, but the dynamics were different now. Wolves who had once followed orders with unthinking obedience, now asked questions, debated strategies, contributed ideas that might once have been dismissed. The change had started with Kieran himself. The morning after the trials, he'd emerged from his private quarters with an expression of grim determination and called a pack assembly that no one had expected. "What happened 3 nights ago," he'd said, addressing his people with characteristic directness, "forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my leadership. About the difference between ruling through fear and leading through respect." The admission had sent shockwaves through the assembled wolves. Alphas didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge weakness, didn't admit to making mistakes. But Kieran had done all 3. "I've been so focused on keeping this pack safe," he'd continued, "that I forgot safety isn't the only thing worth fighting for. Freedom matters. Choice matters. The right to follow your heart instead of someone else's expectations, that matters too." His amber eyes had found Sera's in the crowd, and she'd seen something there she'd never noticed before: genuine affection, the kind a protective older brother might show a beloved sister. "Sera Nightwood has chosen her mate," Kieran had announced formally. "By ancient law and sacred trial, that choice is binding and beyond question. Any who would challenge her right to love whom she pleases will answer to me directly." The message had been clear: touch Sera or Ethan and face the Alpha's wrath. It was protection she'd never expected from the man who'd spent years trying to claim her for himself. Now, 3 days later, she was beginning to understand the depth of his transformation. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting Elena or one of the servants. Instead, Kieran entered, carrying a leather portfolio that looked official and ominous in equal measure. "Alpha," Sera said carefully, still unsure of their new dynamic. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm here about what I can do for you," Kieran replied, settling into the chair across from her with the careful movements of a man still healing from his encounter with Ethan. "We need to discuss your future with the pack." Sera's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "My future?" "Don't look so worried," Kieran said with the ghost of his old smile. "I'm not here to exile you or demand your submission. I'm here to offer you something no Luna has ever been given before: a choice." He opened the portfolio and withdrew several documents covered in the formal script of pack law. "I've been in contact with the Council of Alphas, explaining the unprecedented circumstances of your mating. They're intrigued by the implications." Intrigued how? The claiming trial hasn't been invoked in over 2 centuries. When it happened, the records show that the successful challenger was always another werewolf, usually an alpha from a rival pack, attempting to steal a valuable mate. Kieran's expression grew thoughtful. A human succeeding in the trials, proving his worthiness to claim a Luna-born wolf, that's completely without precedent. Sera frowned, sensing complications beneath his words. What does that mean for us? It means the council has to decide whether to recognize your mating as legally binding, or declare it an aberration that threatens pack stability. Kieran's voice was carefully neutral. They're calling for a formal hearing in 2 weeks, where both you and Ethan will have to appear before the assembled alphas to defend your bond. The words hit Sera like a physical blow. They want to put us on trial again? In a sense, yes. But this time, it won't be about proving your worthiness to each other. It will be about proving your worthiness to exist in werewolf society as a mated pair. Sera's mind raced through the implications. The Council of Alphas was comprised of the most powerful pack leaders in North America, wolves who'd built their authority on tradition and hierarchy. The idea of a human claiming a Luna-born mate would challenge everything they believed about natural order. And if they rule against us? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes clouded with regret. Then you'll be given a choice: dissolve your mating and return to traditional pack structure, or be declared rogue and banished from werewolf society permanently. The words settled over Sera like a death shroud. Banishment meant losing everything, not just her pack, but her connection to werewolf culture, her place in the supernatural world, her very identity as a wolf. There's more, Kieran continued grimly. If the council rules against you, other packs will be within their rights to hunt you both as rogues. Your mating would be declared unlawful, your bond considered a corruption that needs to be corrected. Corrected how? Sera asked, though she already knew the answer. By eliminating the human who corrupted a Luna's bloodline. Sera's wolf snarled with protective fury. They'd kill him just for loving me? They'd kill him for daring to claim what they consider above his station, Kieran corrected. In their view, Ethan's victory in the trials doesn't prove he's worthy. It proves our laws have become too lenient, too corrupted by modern thinking. The injustice of it made Sera want to howl with rage. Ethan had proven himself beyond any reasonable doubt, had shown courage and skill that impressed even their harshest critics. But because he was human, because he challenged their preconceptions about power and hierarchy, they wanted to destroy him. What's the alternative? She asked, though part of her was afraid to know. Kieran's expression grew almost hopeful. That's where things get interesting. I've been corresponding with 3 alphas who are sympathetic to your situation. Marcus Ironwood from the Mountain Pack, Elena Riversong from the Northern Territory, and David Stormcrow from the Coastal Range. Sera recognized the names, progressive leaders who'd been pushing for reform in werewolf society for years. They support us? They support the idea that forced matings are an obsolete tradition that weakens rather than strengthens pack bonds, Kieran clarified. Whether they'll support your specific case remains to be seen. He leaned forward, his expression growing intense. But here's what's interesting, Sera. I've been researching your bloodline, really researching it, going back to the original pack records. Do you know what I found? Sera shook her head, though something in his tone made her wolf pace with anticipation. Your great-great-grandmother wasn't just any Luna, Kieran said quietly. She was Sera Nightwood, the first Luna, the one who established the original pack laws that governed mating rights. The name hit Sera like lightning. Every werewolf knew the story of Sera Nightwood, the legendary Luna who'd helped forge the first treaties between rival packs. But she'd thought it was just that, legend. She was real? More than real. She was the most powerful Luna in recorded history, and according to the archives, she wrote specific provisions into pack law about true mating bonds. Kieran's smile was fierce and proud. Provisions that have been forgotten over the centuries, buried under layers of political convenience and traditional interpretation. What kind of provisions? The right of Luna bloodlines to choose their own mates based on spiritual compatibility rather than political advantage. The recognition of true bonds regardless of species, status, or pack affiliation. Kieran's eyes blazed with discovery. She literally wrote your legal defense into the original laws, Sera. She foresaw a time when someone like you would need protection from those who valued politics over love. Hope flared in Sera's chest, bright and desperate. So we have a legal case? Better than that. You have a historical precedent that predates every objection the council might raise. Kieran gathered the documents back into his portfolio. But it's not going to be easy. You'll have to prove not just that your bond is genuine, but that it represents a return to the original intent of pack law, rather than a corruption of it. How do we do that? Kieran's smile was all teeth and dark promise. By showing the council something they've never seen before. A human who doesn't just love a werewolf, but who strengthens the pack through that love. A bond that makes everyone involved better, stronger, more complete. Sera thought of Ethan, of his garden where impossible things grew in defiance of harsh reality. Of his gentle hands and fierce heart, and the way he looked at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe. He does make me stronger, she said softly. He makes me remember who I am, underneath all the expectations and traditions. He makes me want to be worthy of the love he offers. Then prove it, Kieran said simply. Prove it to the council, prove it to the packs, prove it to everyone who thinks love is weakness and tradition is more important than happiness. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Sera, I'm proud of you. Proud of the choice you made, proud of the strength it took to claim your own fate. And I'm proud to have been wrong about what you needed to be happy. After he left, Sera remained at her window, watching her packmates go about their daily lives with the weight of coming judgment heavy on her shoulders. In 2 weeks, she and Ethan would stand before the most powerful werewolves in North America and defend their right to love each other. If they failed, everything they'd fought for would be stripped away. If they succeeded, they might just change the world. But first, she had to tell Ethan what they were up against. And somehow find the courage to face the possibility that even true love might not be strong enough to overcome centuries of prejudice and fear. Chapter 12, War Council. Ethan's garden had never looked more beautiful, or more fragile than it did in the golden afternoon light filtering through the ancient pines. He worked among his carefully tended rows with the patient devotion of someone who understood that growing things required faith in tomorrow, even when tomorrow felt uncertain. Sera found him harvesting late-season tomatoes, his hands gentle as he selected only the ripest fruit. The sight made her heart clench with fierce protectiveness, this good man who nurtured life in a world that too often chose destruction. We need to talk, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Ethan looked up with the smile that never failed to make her breath catch, but his expression quickly grew serious as he read the worry in her face. What's wrong? The Council of Alphas wants to review our mating, Sera said without preamble. They're calling for a formal hearing in 2 weeks to determine whether our bond is legally valid. Ethan set down his harvest basket and straightened slowly, his green eyes never leaving her face. And if they rule against us? Banishment at best. Death at worst. Sera's voice remained steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. They consider you a corruption that needs to be eliminated. She expected anger, fear, maybe even regret for getting involved with her in the first place. Instead, Ethan moved closer and pulled her into his arms, his embrace solid and reassuring. Then we'll prove them wrong, he said simply. We'll show them that love strengthens rather than weakens, that our bond makes both of us better than we were apart. How? Sera asked, allowing herself to lean into his strength. These are the most traditional, most powerful alphas in North America. They've built their authority on the idea that hierarchy is natural law, that humans and werewolves occupying equal ground is an impossibility. Then we'll have to expand their definition of what's possible, Ethan replied, his arms tightening around her. Show them something they've never seen before. Sera pulled back to study his face, looking for signs of the fear he had to be feeling. Instead, she found determination and something that looked suspiciously like excitement. "You have an idea," she said. "I have several ideas. The question is whether you trust me enough to try them." Before Sera could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Marcus Nightwood emerged from the tree line, followed by Elena Rivers and, to Sera's surprise, 3 werewolves she didn't recognize. "Uncle?" Sera moved to Ethan's side, both of them tense and ready for trouble. "Relax," Marcus said with a slight smile. "I brought friends." The 3 strangers stepped forward, and Sera's enhanced senses immediately cataloged their power levels. These were alphas. She could feel the weight of their authority like pressure against her skin. "Sera Nightwood," the first stranger said, extending his hand in greeting. "Marcus Ironwood, Mountain Pack. I've heard quite a lot about you and your unprecedented situation." He was tall and lean, with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter storms. His handshake was firm but not dominating, respectful rather than possessive. "Elena Riversong, Northern Territory," the second alpha said. She was a woman of middle years with silver-streaked auburn hair and a presence that commanded attention without demanding submission. "And you must be Ethan Cross, the human who defeated Kieran Blackthorne in single combat." "I didn't defeat him," Ethan corrected carefully. "I convinced him to yield. There's a difference." The third alpha, a man with dark skin and eyes like liquid amber, laughed with genuine amusement. "Even better," he said, stepping forward to offer his own greeting. "David Stormcrow, Coastal Range. A human who can convince an alpha to yield without violence? That's a skill worth studying." Sera felt some of her tension ease as she realized these weren't enemies come to judge them, but potential allies seeking to understand their situation firsthand. "What brings 3 alphas to my garden?" Ethan asked, though his tone remained respectful. "Research," Elena Riversong replied. "We've been following your case with great interest, and frankly, we have our own reasons for wanting to see the Council's review go in your favor." "What reasons?" Sera asked. Marcus Ironwood's expression grew serious. "The forced mating system is killing our packs from within. We've watched too many wolves trapped in loveless bonds, seen too much resentment and depression among mates chosen for political convenience rather than genuine compatibility." "The statistics are sobering," David Stormcrow added. "Pack bonds are weaker, birth rates are declining, and we're losing young wolves to human society at an alarming rate. They'd rather abandon their heritage entirely than submit to arranged matings." Elena Riversong nodded grimly. "Your successful claim of a true mating bond represents a path back to the old ways, when love and spiritual compatibility mattered more than bloodlines and political alliances. But we need to prove that path is viable," Marcus continued. "Not just for individual happiness, but for the long-term strength of werewolf society." Sera began to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about her and Ethan anymore, it was about the future of their entire species. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Documentation," Elena replied promptly. "Evidence that your bond produces measurable benefits rather than just personal satisfaction. Improved pack dynamics, enhanced individual capabilities, strengthened community ties." "How do we prove something like that?" Ethan asked. David smiled. "That's where things get interesting. We've been researching the historical records of true mating bonds, comparing pack performance before and after such unions were established. The data is remarkable." He produced a tablet from his jacket and pulled up a series of charts and graphs. Packs with verified true mating bonds show increases in territorial control, resource management, conflict resolution, and overall member satisfaction. The bonds don't just benefit the mated pair, they strengthen the entire community. "Why?" Sera asked, studying the data with growing fascination. "Because true mates model what healthy relationships look like," Marcus explained. "They demonstrate that power can be shared rather than hoarded, that strength comes from mutual support rather than domination. Other pack members see their example and begin forming stronger bonds themselves. Elena nodded. It creates a cascade effect. One genuine partnership inspiring others, leading to a more cohesive and resilient pack structure. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. So if we can prove our bond produces these kinds of benefits, then we can argue that true mating bonds aren't just permissible under pack law, they're essential for pack survival, David finished. We can make the case that the current system of arranged matings is actually weakening werewolf society. It's brilliant, Sera breathed. Instead of defending our right to be different, we're proving that different is better. Exactly, Marcus said with satisfaction. But we need concrete evidence, measurable improvements that can't be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. What kind of evidence? Ethan asked. Elena smiled. That's where your unique situation becomes an advantage. You've been living among Kieran's pack for several days now, interacting with wolves who've never encountered a human werewolf mating before. We need to document how your presence has affected pack dynamics. I've been keeping informal notes, Elena Rivers said, speaking for the first time since the other alphas had arrived. Kieran's behavior has changed dramatically since the trials. He's more collaborative in his leadership style, more open to input from pack members, less likely to make unilateral decisions. Other changes too, Marcus Nightwood added. Training sessions are more cooperative, disputes are being resolved through discussion rather than dominance displays, and overall stress levels are down across the pack. David pulled up another chart on his tablet. We've been monitoring cortisol levels in pack members' scent markers. There's been a measurable decrease in stress hormones since your mating was recognized. Sera stared at the data in amazement. Our bond is affecting the entire pack? True mating bonds have always been said to radiate positive energy, Elena Riversong explained. But we've never had the scientific tools to measure it before. Your situation is providing unprecedented insight into how genuine love affects supernatural communities. There's more, Marcus Ironwood said, his expression growing excited. We've been in contact with several other packs that have allowed true mating bonds to form naturally. They're showing similar improvements in pack cohesion and individual well-being. A pattern is emerging, David agreed. One that suggests the current mating system isn't just morally questionable, it's practically ineffective. Ethan looked at Sera, and she could see the same realization dawning in his green eyes that was blooming in her chest. They weren't just fighting for their right to be together, they were pioneering a return to something their species had lost. What do you need us to do? Sera asked. Be yourselves, Elena Riversong said simply. Continue building your bond, continue interacting with Kieran's pack, continue demonstrating what a healthy partnership looks like. We'll handle the documentation and data analysis. There's one more thing, Marcus added, his expression growing serious. The council hearing will be intense. You'll be facing alphas who see your bond as a direct threat to their authority. Some of them will try to provoke you, to make you lose control and prove their point that humans can't handle werewolf society. How do we handle that? Ethan asked. By being better than they expect, David replied. By showing grace under pressure, strength without aggression, love without possessiveness. Prove that your bond makes you both more than you were alone. Elena Riversong nodded. The opposition will argue that humans are too weak, too emotional, too unstable to be proper mates for werewolves. Your job is to demonstrate the opposite, that your humanity brings qualities our species needs. Like what? Sera asked. Compassion without condescension. Strength without brutality. The ability to build rather than simply dominate. Marcus smiled. All the things Ethan showed during the trials, magnified by the security of your completed bond. Ethan was quiet for several moments, his mind clearly working through strategies and possibilities. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet confidence Sera had fallen in love with. I'll need access to pack records, he said. Historical data on mating practices, pack performance metrics, anything that can help us build our case. Done, Elena Riversong agreed immediately. I'll also need to spend more time integrating with pack activities, Ethan continued. If we're claiming that human werewolf bonds strengthen communities, I need to prove I can contribute meaningfully to pack life. That can be arranged, Marcus Nightwood said. Though be prepared for some resistance. Not everyone will be as accepting as Kieran has become. Sera felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of Ethan facing potential hostility from her packmates. But when she looked at his face, saw the determination burning in his eyes, her wolf settled with confidence. He'd already faced down an alpha and 3 of the pack's strongest warriors. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them together. 2 weeks, David said, gathering his materials. 2 weeks to gather evidence, document improvements, and prepare for the most important hearing in werewolf legal history. No pressure, Elena added with a wry smile. As the 3 alphas prepared to leave, Marcus Ironwood turned back to Sera and Ethan with an expression of fierce hope. You know what you represent, he asked quietly. You represent the possibility that our kind can evolve, can adapt, can become something better than what we've been. Don't underestimate the power of that. After they left, Sera and Ethan stood alone in the garden that had brought them together, surrounded by the beauty he'd coaxed from unforgiving soil through patience and love. 2 weeks, Sera said softly. 2 weeks, Ethan agreed, pulling her close. Think we can change the world in 2 weeks? Sera looked at him, this remarkable man who'd already changed her world so completely, and felt her wolf sing with absolute certainty. We already have, she said. The question now is whether we can convince everyone else. The sun was setting behind the ancient pines, painting everything in shades of gold and promise. In the distance they could hear the evening howls of the pack settling into another night of peace. A peace that might not exist in 2 weeks' time, depending on the council's decision. But tonight they had each other. Tonight they had hope. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Chapter 13, The Hunt Begins. The pack compound transformed over the next week, as Ethan began integrating into daily life with a determination that both impressed and unnerved the resident wolves. Sera watched from the sidelines as her mate, the word still sent shivers of joy through her, threw himself into proving his worth to creatures who'd been taught to see his kind as inferior. He started with the practical things. Kieran, still navigating his own transformation from possessive alpha to supportive leader, had assigned Ethan to work with the pack's agricultural team. What should have been a diplomatic gesture, giving the human something useful but non-threatening to do, instead became a revelation. He's redesigned our entire crop rotation system, Maria Santos, the head agriculturalist, reported to Sera with barely contained amazement. Increased our yield projections by 30% and reduced our water usage by half. In 3 days. Sera found Ethan that afternoon in the compound's extensive greenhouses, surrounded by charts and soil samples, and a group of fascinated werewolves who hung on his every word. He was explaining something about companion planting and nutrient cycling with the enthusiasm of a professor and the practicality of someone who'd spent years making impossible things grow. The key is understanding that plants aren't isolated organisms, he was saying, sketching root systems on a whiteboard. They communicate through chemical signals, share resources, protect each other from pests. A good garden isn't just a collection of individual plants, it's a community working together toward common goals. One of the younger wolves, barely 18 and still learning to control his shifting, raised his hand tentatively. Like a pack? Ethan's face lit up with approval. Exactly like a pack, Jason. The strongest gardens are the ones where every plant has a role to play, where diversity is seen as strength rather than weakness, where the health of the whole depends on the flourishing of each individual part. Sera felt her heart swell with pride as she watched the wolves respond to Ethan's teaching. These were packmates who'd been raised to see humans as weak, inferior, unable to contribute anything meaningful to supernatural society. But here was evidence to the contrary. a human who understood systems and connections in ways that enhanced their own capabilities. "He's good at this," Kieran said quietly, joining her at the greenhouse entrance. "He's good at everything," Sera replied, unable to keep the love from her voice. "Did you know he has degrees in agricultural engineering, environmental science, and conflict resolution?" Kieran's eyebrows rose. "Conflict resolution? 5 years of preparation, remember? He didn't just study werewolf combat techniques, he studied werewolf society. Psychology, pack dynamics, historical patterns of interspecies cooperation." Sera smiled. "He's been getting ready to be part of our world since long before he knew I existed." "Impressive," Kieran admitted. "And strategic. The Council Alphas won't be able to dismiss him as an ignorant human, stumbling into something he doesn't understand." Their conversation was interrupted by excited voices from within the greenhouse. Through the glass walls they could see Ethan working with Jason to transplant some sort of climbing vine, his hands patient and sure as he guided the young wolf through the process. "You have to be gentle but confident," Ethan was explaining. "The plant can sense your intentions through your touch. If you're uncertain, it'll be stressed. If you're too aggressive, it'll go into shock. But if you're calm and purposeful..." Jason followed his instructions carefully, his enhanced werewolf senses allowing him to feel what Ethan was describing. When the transplant was complete, both human and wolf stepped back to admire their work. "It's not afraid anymore," Jason said wonderingly. "I can smell it, the stress scent is gone." "Everything responds to being handled with care," Ethan replied. "Plants, animals, people. When you approach with respect instead of dominance, with partnership instead of conquest, you get better results every time." Sera saw Kieran stiffen beside her as the implications hit home. This wasn't just gardening advice, it was a fundamental challenge to the Alpha's worldview, delivered so gently that it couldn't be taken as criticism. But instead of anger, Kieran's expression showed something that looked like revelation. "He's not just teaching them about plants," the Alpha said slowly. "No," Sera agreed. "He's teaching them about leadership. About the difference between power that dominates and power that nurtures." Over the following days, Ethan's influence spread through the pack like ripples in still water. He joined evening training sessions, not as a participant. His human limitations made sparring with werewolves impractical, but as an observer who asked thoughtful questions and offered unexpected insights. "Why do you always train for individual combat?" he asked Magnus Ironheart, the pack's head trainer, after watching a particularly intense session. "Werewolves are naturally social creatures. Wouldn't cooperative techniques be more effective than solo fighting skills?" Magnus had initially bristled at the suggestion, a human questioning centuries of werewolf martial tradition, but Ethan's respectful tone and genuine curiosity had diffused the potential conflict. "We train for pack hunts," Magnus replied carefully. "Coordination is important in those situations. But do you train for coordination, or do you train individuals who happen to hunt together?" Ethan pressed. "Because from what I've observed, your individual skills are impressive, but your group dynamics could use work." The comment should have been insulting. Instead, Magnus found himself considering it with the open mind of someone secure enough in his abilities to recognize room for improvement. By the end of the week, training sessions had evolved to include coordination drills, communication exercises, and team-building activities that emphasized mutual support over individual dominance. The pack's combat effectiveness had improved measurably, but more importantly, their social cohesion had strengthened. "It's remarkable," Elena Rivers told Sera as they watched the evening session. "He's managed to enhance their capabilities while making them more cooperative. Usually, those are opposing forces in werewolf culture." "He doesn't see them as opposing forces," Sera replied, pride evident in her voice. "He sees them as complementary aspects of the same goal, creating a stronger, more resilient community." But not everyone was convinced by Ethan's gentle revolution. Tobias Grimwald still nursed resentment from his defeat during the claiming trial. and his attitude had infected a small but vocal group of traditionalist wolves, who saw Ethan's presence as an ongoing insult to pack hierarchy. They didn't openly challenge him. Kieran's protection made that too dangerous, but they found subtle ways to undermine his efforts and question his legitimacy. "He's changing things that don't need changing," Tobias muttered during a pack meeting, his voice just loud enough to be heard by nearby wolves. "Making us soft, making us forget what it means to be predators. The old ways have served us well for centuries," added Carla Thornwick, still smarting from her own trial defeat. "Why should we listen to someone who's been here less than 2 weeks?" The criticism was carefully phrased, not quite insubordination, not quite challenge, but enough to sow seeds of doubt among pack members who were already struggling to adapt to rapid change. Sera felt her wolf bristle with protective anger, but Ethan's response surprised everyone. He listened. Instead of defending himself or dismissing their concerns, he sought out Tobias and his supporters for private conversations, asking genuine questions about their fears and frustrations. "You're worried that I'm making the pack vulnerable?" he said to Tobias during one such discussion. "I understand that concern. Change can be dangerous if it's not carefully managed." Tobias had expected argument, confrontation, the kind of dominance display that would justify his resentment. Ethan's thoughtful response left him uncertain how to proceed. "You don't understand our world," Tobias said, though with less venom than before. "You don't know what we've survived, what threats we face." "You're right," Ethan agreed readily. "I don't have your experience, your hard-won knowledge of pack survival. That's why I need your help." "My help?" "To understand the balance between adaptation and tradition. To learn which changes strengthen the pack and which ones weaken it." Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not trying to replace werewolf culture, Tobias. I'm trying to understand it well enough to contribute to it without damaging it." The conversation didn't resolve Tobias's concerns overnight, but it began a dialogue that might eventually lead to understanding. More importantly, it demonstrated to the watching pack that Ethan wasn't interested in conquest or dominance, he was interested in partnership. As the second week progressed, evidence mounted that Ethan's integration was producing the measurable benefits the allied alphas had hoped to document. Pack cohesion improved, stress levels decreased, and productivity increased across multiple areas of compound life. But the most significant change was harder to quantify: a shift in the pack's collective mood from guarded acceptance to genuine optimism. Wolves who'd spent years following orders without question were beginning to think creatively, contribute ideas, take initiative in ways that enhanced rather than challenged pack structure. "It's like he's reminded us who we could be," Elena Rivers observed during one of her regular evaluations. "Not just survivors but thrivers. Not just followers, but partners in building something better." Sera felt the truth of those words in her bones. Ethan hadn't just claimed her as his mate, he claimed the entire pack as his family, approaching them with the same patient love he'd shown his garden. And like his garden, they were responding by blooming in ways they hadn't known were possible. But even as hope grew in the Shadow Creek pack, reports filtered in from the broader werewolf community that the Council of Alphas was preparing for a hearing unlike any in their history. Traditional faction leaders were mobilizing opposition, calling Ethan's presence an existential threat to werewolf society. The hunt for their happiness was about to begin in earnest. And success was far from guaranteed. Chapter 14: Unlikely Allies. The message arrived 3 days before they were scheduled to appear before the Council of Alphas, delivered by a raven whose intelligence gleamed far too brightly in its obsidian eyes. Sera recognized the messenger immediately, one of the shapeshifter scouts used by the Council for communications they wanted to keep absolutely secure. She took the sealed letter with hands that trembled only slightly, her wolf pacing with anxiety as she recognized the weight of official documentation. Whatever was inside would either offer hope or confirm their worst fears. Ethan found her in his garden, their garden now, though the possessive thought still sent warmth through her chest, sitting on the stone bench he'd built beside the jasmine grove. She held the unopened letter like it might bite her. "Bad news?" he asked gently, settling beside her with the easy intimacy that had developed between them over the past 2 weeks. "I don't know yet," Sera admitted. "I'm afraid to look." Ethan's hand covered hers, steady and warm. "Whatever it says, we'll face it together." The simple certainty in his voice gave her the courage to break the council's seal and unfold the heavy parchment within. What she read made her gasp with surprise that was equal parts relief and concern. "What is it?" Ethan asked, reading her expression. "An ally we never expected," Sera breathed, scanning the letter again to make sure she'd understood correctly. "Alpha Kieran Moonrunner, of the Eastern Seaboard Pack. She's requesting permission to speak at our hearing." Ethan frowned. "Is that good or bad?" "I honestly don't know." Sera set the letter aside and rubbed her temples, trying to process the implications. Kieran Moonrunner is complicated. She's one of the most powerful alphas on the continent, incredibly traditional in most ways, but also fiercely protective of lunar rights. Lunar rights? The old laws that protected female werewolves from being treated as property rather than partners. Most packs have forgotten them, but Catherine's territory still observes them strictly. Sera looked at Ethan with growing hope. If she's supporting us, it's not about progressive politics, it's about legal precedent. What kind of legal precedent? Before Sera could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles made them both look toward the forest road. 3 black SUVs wound through the trees toward the compound, their tinted windows and official plates marking them as council business. "They're early," Sera said, her stomach clenching with anxiety. The vehicles came to a stop in the compound's main courtyard, and Sera watched through the garden screening trees as figures emerged from each one. She recognized some faces from her research: council representatives, official observers, the bureaucratic machinery that surrounded any major alpha gathering. But it was the final figure to emerge that made her breath catch with surprise. Alpha Kieran Moonrunner stepped from the lead vehicle with the fluid grace of apex predator, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun and her ice-blue eyes scanning the compound with professional assessment. She was smaller than Sera had expected, barely 5.5 feet tall, but her presence filled the space around her like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "She's here," Sera whispered, equal parts awed and terrified. "The traditional alpha who supports lunar rights?" Ethan asked, studying the woman with interest. "The most dangerous politician in werewolf society," Sera corrected. "Someone whose support could legitimize us completely, or whose opposition could destroy us utterly." Kieran appeared at the courtyard's edge, moving to greet the unexpected guests with the careful diplomacy of someone who knew his pack was under intense scrutiny. The conversation was too distant for even Sera's enhanced hearing to catch individual words, but body language spoke volumes. Catherine's posture was formal, but not hostile. Kieran's responses seemed respectful but wary. Whatever was being discussed, it wasn't going badly. Yet. "We should go meet her," Sera said, though every instinct screamed at her to hide in the garden until the danger passed. "We should," Ethan agreed, offering his arm with courtly grace. "Time to find out if we have an ally or an executioner." They made their way through the compound's winding paths, arriving at the courtyard just as Kieran Moonrunner turned from her conversation with Kieran. Her ice-blue eyes found Sera's immediately, and for a moment that felt like eternity, the two women studied each other with the intensity of potential adversaries. Then Kieran smiled, an expression so unexpected that several nearby wolves actually stepped back in surprise. "Sera Nightwood," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made lesser wolves instinctively lower their eyes. "You look exactly like your great-great-grandmother." "You knew Moira Nightwood?" Sera asked, caught off guard by the personal reference. "I knew her writings, her legal arguments, her vision for what werewolf society could become." Catherine's gaze shifted to Ethan, and her smile grew warmer. "And you must be the human who's turned our entire legal system upside down." "I prefer to think of it as right side up," Ethan replied with the easy confidence that had won over so many of Sera's packmates. I'm Ethan Cross, and I'm honored to meet you, Alpha Moonrunner. Catherine's laugh was like silver bells in winter wind. Diplomatic and charming. No wonder you've caused such a stir. She gestured toward the compound's main building. Shall we discuss your situation somewhere more private? I have information that might interest you. They gathered in Kieran's formal office, a space designed to impress visitors with its mixture of rustic elegance and understated power. Catherine settled into her chair with feline grace, while Sera and Ethan took seats across from her with Kieran flanking them in a show of solidarity. Before we begin, Catherine said, her expression growing serious, I want you to understand my position. I'm not here because I approve of interspecies mating, or because I think tradition should be abandoned lightly. I'm here because the law is being perverted to serve political convenience rather than justice. She opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a thick sheaf of documents. I've spent the last 2 weeks researching every legal precedent related to true mating bonds, going back to the original pact charters. What I found was illuminating. What did you find? Sera asked, though part of her was afraid to know. That the current system of arranged matings has no basis in traditional law, Catherine said bluntly. It's a relatively recent innovation, maybe 2 centuries old, created during a period of territorial wars when political alliances were more important than individual happiness. Ethan leaned forward. But the laws about true mating bonds are ancient and absolute, Catherine confirmed. Written into the fundamental charter that governs all werewolf society. They can't be overturned by council vote or alpha decree, they're constitutional law. Hope flared in Sera's chest, bright and desperate. So our bond is legal? Your bond is not just legal, it's protected by the highest authority in our legal system, Catherine said with satisfaction. The question isn't whether you have the right to be mated. The question is whether the council will acknowledge that right, or attempt to ignore it. And if they ignore it? Kieran asked. Catherine's smile turned predatory. Then I'll remind them that constitutional law supersedes their personal preferences. Rather forcefully, if necessary. She spread the documents across Kieran's desk, revealing charts and legal citations that painted a comprehensive picture of werewolf mating law. The case is actually quite simple. True mating bonds are recognized by charter law as superseding any other consideration, political, social, or hierarchical. When such a bond is properly established and documented, no authority has the right to dissolve it. But what about the species difference? Sera asked. Surely that creates complications? Interestingly, no, Catherine replied. The original charter makes no species distinctions when discussing true mating bonds. It speaks only of souls recognizing their destined partners, and bonds forged by divine will rather than mortal convenience. Ethan was studying the documents with the careful attention of someone who understood legal language. This section here, he said, pointing to a particular passage. It talks about trials of worthiness for contested bonds. That's what we went through, isn't it? Exactly, Catherine confirmed. The claiming trial is specifically designed to test and validate true mating bonds when they're challenged by existing arrangements. Your successful completion of the trials doesn't just prove your bond is real, it makes it legally unassailable. Then why is the council calling for a hearing? Kieran asked. Catherine's expression grew grim. Because some of the council members are more interested in preserving their own power than upholding the law. They see true mating bonds as a threat to the arranged marriage system that keeps political alliances stable. And if enough of them vote against us? They can't vote against constitutional law, Catherine said firmly. But they can make life very difficult for anyone who challenges their authority. Unofficial sanctions, social ostracism, economic pressure. There are many ways to punish legal victories. Sera felt her wolf snarl with frustration. Even if they won, even if the law was on their side, they could still be made to suffer for daring to claim their rights. However, Catherine continued, and something in her tone made everyone look up hopefully, they can also be reminded that constitutional violations have consequences. That alphas who ignore charter law forfeit their own legal protections. What does that mean? Ethan asked. It means that if the council tries to rule against you illegally, they open themselves up to challenges of their own authority. Other pacts could invoke the same constitutional provisions to challenge arranged matings, territorial agreements, resource allocations, the entire system they've built on political convenience rather than legal foundation. Understanding dawned in Sera's eyes. You're not just protecting our bond. You're protecting the law itself. I'm protecting the principle that law should be based on justice rather than power, Catherine corrected. Your case happens to be the perfect vehicle for establishing that principle. They spent the next several hours going over legal strategies, potential arguments, and the political landscape they'd be navigating at the council hearing. By the time they finished, Sera felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. One more thing, Catherine said as she prepared to leave. The hearing will be public, not just council members, but representatives from pacts across the continent. They'll be watching to see how this precedent gets established. More pressure, Ethan observed. More opportunity, Catherine corrected. A chance to demonstrate that true mating bonds don't threaten werewolf society, they strengthen it. That love built on choice is more powerful than obligation built on coercion. After she left, Sera and Ethan remained in Kieran's office, processing the magnitude of what they'd learned. They had the law on their side, powerful allies supporting them, and constitutional protections that should make their bond unassailable. But they also had enemies who would stop at nothing to preserve a system that benefited them, even if it meant perverting justice to do so. The hearing was in 3 days. And the future of werewolf society might well hang in the balance. Chapter 15, The Ancient Prophecy. The night before their departure for the council hearing, Sera couldn't sleep. She lay in Ethan's arms in the cabin he'd built at the garden's heart, their sanctuary, their place of peace in a world gone mad with judgment and politics, listening to his steady breathing and trying to quiet her racing thoughts. Tomorrow, they would stand before the most powerful werewolves in North America and defend not just their right to love each other, but the principle that hearts should choose their own bonds. The law might be on their side, but the law was only as strong as those willing to enforce it. A soft tapping at the cabin's door made both of them sit up alert. Ethan reached for the lamp while Sera extended her senses, cataloging the familiar scent profile of their late-night visitor. "Elena," she called softly. "Come in." The elderly healer entered with her characteristic quiet grace, but something about her posture made Sera's wolf pace with unease. Elena carried herself like someone bearing news that would change everything, again. "I'm sorry to wake you," Elena said, settling into the chair beside their bed. "But there's something you need to know before tomorrow. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Ethan sat up completely, his green eyes alert with concern. "What is it?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her pale blue eyes distant with memory and regret. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of secrets held too long. "Your bloodline carries more than just Luna heritage," she said to Sera. "Much more. And tomorrow's hearing may awaken something that's been sleeping in your genetic code for generations." Sera felt ice crystallize in her veins. "What kind of something?" "The old stories speak of a Luna who would arise when werewolf society faced its greatest crisis," Elena replied. "A woman who carried the power to reshape pack bonds, to strengthen or sever connections between mates, to rewrite the very foundations of how our kind relates to each other." "That's mythology," Sera said, though her wolf was stirring with recognition of something ancient and powerful. "Legend." "Is it?" Elena's smile was sad and knowing. "Your great-great-grandmother wrote about having visions, dreams of a descendant who would face an impossible choice between duty and desire. She described a woman with your exact features, your precise coloring, your specific combination of strength and gentleness." Elena reached into her robes and withdrew a leather-bound journal so old its pages were nearly transparent. Sera Nightwood's private writings. She hid them before her death, with instructions that they should only be revealed when her prophesied descendant appeared. Sera's hands trembled as she accepted the journal. The moment her fingers touched the worn leather, electricity shot through her system. Not the warm recognition she felt with Ethan, but something wilder, more primitive, like touching a live wire connected to the moon itself. "What does it say?" Ethan asked, his own voice tight with concern. Sera opened the journal carefully, her enhanced vision allowing her to read the faded script in the dim lamplight. What she found made her breath catch with shock and wonder. "The Luna of choosing will arise when love faces law," she read aloud. "Born of the Nightwood line, she will carry power to remake the bonds that bind our kind. Her choice will echo through generations, strengthen or shatter, build up or tear down, evolution or extinction." Elena nodded grimly. "Keep reading." Sera turned the page, finding a detailed description that made her stomach clench with recognition. She will be marked by silver-touch darkness, born under the winter moon, claimed by one not of our kind yet somehow belonging. Her true mate will walk on two legs always, but possess a heart that beats with pack rhythm. That's us?" Ethan said wonderingly. "She's describing us exactly. She's describing the moment when everything our people believe about mating bonds will be tested," Elena corrected. "The question is what you'll choose to do with the power that's awakening in your bloodline." Sera could feel it now, something stirring deep in her bones, ancient and vast and terrifyingly powerful. It was like having a sleeping dragon uncurl in her chest, stretching wings that could either shelter or incinerate everything she loved. "What kind of power?" she whispered. "The ability to forge true mate bonds," Elena said simply. "Not just recognize them but create them. Strengthen them beyond any force that might try to break them. Or?" Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The ability to sever bonds that were formed through force or politics rather than genuine connection." The implications hit Sera like a physical blow. If she truly possessed such power, she could free every werewolf trapped in loveless political matings. Could give them the choice she'd had to fight for. But she could also destroy pack structures that had existed for centuries, unraveling the social fabric that held werewolf society together. "The prophecy continues," Elena said gently. "Her choice will come at the moment of greatest testing, when the old guard demands submission and the new world calls for freedom. Choose love and bonds will strengthen beyond breaking. Choose duty and chains will multiply until no heart beats free." Ethan's hand found Sera's, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of absolute support. "What does that mean, practically speaking?" "It means," Elena said, her ancient eyes blazing with fierce hope, "that tomorrow's hearing isn't just about whether the council will recognize your mating. It's about whether werewolf society evolves beyond the need for forced bonds, or crystallizes into something so rigid that love becomes impossible." Sera closed the journal with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being placed on her shoulders. "I never asked for this kind of responsibility." "The best leaders rarely do," Elena replied. "But responsibility isn't about asking, it's about being worthy when the moment arrives." "And if I'm not worthy? If I make the wrong choice?" Elena's smile was infinitely gentle. "Child, you've already proven your worth by choosing love over convenience, heart over hierarchy. Whatever happens tomorrow, trust that your instincts will guide you true." She rose to leave, then paused at the door. "There's one more thing. The power awakening in you, it's not just yours to wield. True mate bonds are partnerships in the deepest sense. Whatever abilities emerge, they'll be strongest when you and Ethan work together." After she left, Sera and Ethan sat in the quiet darkness, processing the weight of ancient prophecy and impossible power. "How do you feel about being part of a cosmic plan to reshape werewolf society?" Sera asked finally. Ethan's laugh was soft but genuine. Terrified and honored in equal measure. But mostly grateful. "Grateful? That whatever power you're carrying, whatever choice you have to make, I get to face it beside you." He turned to look at her directly, his green eyes serious in the lamplight. We're stronger together, Sera. Whatever tomorrow brings, we'll handle it the same way we've handled everything else, as partners. Sera leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his unwavering faith. Tomorrow would bring judgment, challenge, and possibly the awakening of power she didn't fully understand. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of her true mate, surrounded by the garden they'd built together, ready to face whatever destiny had in store. The ancient prophecy might have set their path, but they would walk it together. That had to be enough. Chapter 16: Betrayal's Sting. The council chamber was carved from living rock deep beneath the Cascade Mountains, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to whisper with the voices of ancient alphas. Sera stood beside Ethan in the center of the circular space, surrounded by the most powerful werewolves in North America, 23 alphas whose combined authority could remake or destroy their world with a single vote. They'd been speaking for 3 hours, presenting their case with careful logic and passionate conviction. Marcus Ironwood had testified to the legal precedents supporting true mate bonds. Elena Riversong had detailed the historical context of forced political matings. David Stormcrow had argued eloquently for the evolution of pack law to match modern understanding of love and compatibility. But Sera could feel the resistance in the air like a physical weight, the deep conservatism of wolves who'd built their power on tradition and hierarchy. The arguments presented are compelling, acknowledged Alpha Harrison Greystone, the council's eldest member, his voice carrying the gravitas of 90 years and 7 successful territorial wars. However, we must consider the broader implications of recognizing such unprecedented bonds. What implications? Ethan asked respectfully, though Sera could sense the frustration coiling beneath his calm exterior. If we accept that humans can claim Luna-born mates through trial by combat, Alpha Victoria Ravencrest replied, her silver hair catching the chamber's torchlight, what message does that send to our people? That strength matters less than sentiment? That centuries of careful bloodline cultivation can be overturned by momentary infatuation? With respect, Alpha Ravencrest, Sera said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, what we share isn't infatuation. It's recognition. The kind of soul-deep connection that our ancestors wrote into the original laws because they understood its power. So you claim, rumbled Alpha Magnus Blackwood, a mountain of a man whose pack controlled territory from Montana to Wyoming. But how do we distinguish between genuine true mate bonds and simple physical attraction dressed up in pretty words? It was the question Sera had been dreading, the one that would require her to reveal abilities she barely understood. She felt the ancient power stirring in her bloodline, responding to the challenge and the pressing need for proof. Perhaps, she said carefully, a demonstration would be more convincing than words. Elena's sharp intake of breath carried clearly in the chamber's acoustics. The elderly healer sat in the witness section, her pale eyes wide with understanding and fear. She knew what Sera was about to attempt, and the risks it carried. What kind of demonstration? Alpha Greystone asked, his weathered features sharpening with interest. Sera looked around the circle of alphas, reading their expressions with newfound clarity. Most were skeptical, but willing to be convinced. A few, like Marcus Ironwood and Elena Riversong, watched her with supportive hope. But others radiated hostility so pure, it made her wolf snarl with recognition of danger. I can show you the difference between true bonds and political arrangements, Sera said, drawing strength from Ethan's presence beside her. I can reveal which matings in this room are based on genuine connection and which were forged for convenience. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several alphas shifted restlessly, their carefully controlled expressions faltering as they processed the implications of her offer. That's impossible, Alpha Ravencrest snapped, though something flickered in her eyes that might have been fear. No one has such power. Luna bloodlines do, Sera replied quietly. The oldest bloodlines, the ones that predate political mating arrangements. We carry the ability to sense and strengthen true bonds, or reveal their absence. She reached for Ethan's hand, letting their connection blaze to life with visible intensity. The air around them shimmered with barely contained energy, and several alphas actually stepped back from the display of power. "This is what a true mate bond looks like," Sera announced, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate in listeners' bones. "Complete recognition, mutual strengthening, spiritual connection that transcends physical attraction or political advantage." The power flowing through her was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She could feel every mating bond in the chamber, could sense which ones thrummed with genuine love, and which ones lay hollow and lifeless despite years of ritual reinforcement. "Now," she continued, her enhanced perception sweeping across the assembled alphas, "let me show you the difference." She focused on Alpha Ravencrest first, reading the bond that connected her to a male alpha from the Eastern Territories. What she found made her stomach clench with sympathetic pain. "Your mating, Alpha Ravencrest, was arranged when you were 16, Sera said gently. "You've spent 40 years trying to love a man who sees you as a political asset rather than a partner. The bond exists, but it's hollow, built on duty rather than desire, maintained through will rather than joy." Ravencrest's face went white, her carefully composed mask cracking to reveal decades of suppressed loneliness. You can't possibly know that." "I can feel it," Sera replied with infinite compassion. "The echo of what might have been, the dreams you buried when you accepted that political convenience mattered more than happiness." She turned to the next alpha, then the next, revealing truths that had been hidden behind facades of successful leadership. Some bonds were genuine, blazing connections that strengthened both partners and made her wolf sing with recognition. But too many were hollow shells, political arrangements that had slowly poisoned the hearts of those trapped within them. "This is why forced matings weaken our people," Sera said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Not because love is weak, but because the absence of love is a cancer that spreads through pack hierarchies, creating leaders who rule through bitterness rather than joy." "Enough!" The shout came from Alpha Magnus Blackwood, his massive frame trembling with rage and something that looked suspiciously like fear. This violation of privacy, this exposure of private bonds, it's exactly why such power should never exist." He stepped forward, his amber eyes blazing with the fury of a predator cornered by forces beyond his understanding. "You ask us to accept that a human can claim one of our finest bloodlines, but look what you're doing with the power that union has awakened. Reading our hearts without permission, exposing our most intimate connections to public scrutiny." Sera felt the tide in the chamber turning as his words struck home. Several alphas nodded agreement, their faces hardening with renewed resistance to her unprecedented abilities. "This is exactly the kind of chaos we feared," Alpha Blackwood continued, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "Grant recognition to this abomination, and every forced mating in werewolf society becomes vulnerable to dissolution. Centuries of carefully negotiated alliances, generations of strategic bloodline cultivation, all of it threatened by the whims of an idealistic girl who thinks love conquers all." "Love does conquer all," Ethan said firmly, stepping forward to stand beside Sera. "That's exactly the point. You're afraid of what she can do because you know she's right. Half the matings in this room are loveless political arrangements that have made everyone involved miserable." "Misery in service of the greater good," Alpha Blackwood shot back. "Sacrifice for pack stability. The kind of mature thinking that keeps our people alive and prosperous instead of scattered and weak." "Or," Sera said quietly, her power still blazing around her like captured moonlight, "we could choose evolution over stagnation. Growth over fear. The strength that comes from genuine connection rather than forced compliance." She looked around the chamber, meeting each alpha's gaze directly. "I'm not here to destroy your matings or dissolve your alliances. I'm here to offer something our people haven't had in generations, the right to choose love when love is possible." But even as she spoke the words, Sera could feel the chamber's energy shifting against her. Too many alphas had too much invested in the current system to risk the upheaval her abilities represented. Fear of change was stronger than hope for happiness. The vote, when it came, would be closer than she dared hope, but not close enough to save them. Unless something fundamental changed in the next few minutes, she and Ethan were going to lose everything they'd fought for. The ancient prophecy had warned of this moment, the choice between love and duty, evolution and extinction. But it hadn't warned her that sometimes, no matter how right you were, the world simply wasn't ready to change. Chapter 17, The Final Stand. The silence in the council chamber stretched taut as bowstring, as the Alphas prepared to cast their votes. Sera could feel the decision crystallizing around them. Fear winning over hope, tradition triumphing over evolution. Too many wolves had too much invested in the old ways to risk the upheaval her power represented. But as Alpha Greystone rose to call for the formal vote, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Wait. Every head turned toward the chamber's entrance, where a figure emerged from the shadows with the quiet authority of absolute power. Sera's breath caught as she recognized the newcomer, Alexander Nightfall, the High Alpha, supreme authority over all werewolf packs in North America. He was smaller than she'd expected, this legendary figure whose word was law across an entire continent. Average height, silver-touched hair, features that spoke of Middle Eastern ancestry mixed with something wilder. But his presence filled the chamber like concentrated moonlight, and every Alpha present bent their necks in automatic submission. High Alpha, Greystone said, his weathered voice tight with surprise. We weren't expecting you. Weren't you? Alexander's smile was enigmatic as he moved into the chamber's center, his pale eyes taking in the scene with calculating interest. A human claiming a Luna-born mate, ancient laws being invoked for the first time in centuries, bloodline powers awakening that could reshape our entire social structure. And you thought I wouldn't take a personal interest? His gaze found Sera's, and she felt the weight of assessment behind those ancient eyes. This was a wolf who'd seen centuries pass, who'd guided their people through wars and plagues and the long struggle to find their place in the modern world. Sera Nightwood, he said formally. Descendant of Moira, carrier of the Luna bloodline, claimed mate of a human who defeated an Alpha in single combat. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. You've certainly made things interesting. High Alpha, Sera replied carefully, unsure whether his presence was salvation or doom. I've simply chosen to follow my heart rather than others' expectations. Have you? Alexander moved closer, his power pressing against her like weight made manifest. Or have you chosen to use abilities you don't fully understand to challenge structures that have kept our people stable for generations? The words echoed Alpha Blackwood's arguments so closely that Sera's heart sank. If the High Alpha opposed her, no combination of supportive votes could save them. With respect, Ethan said, stepping forward with the kind of courage that had first drawn Sera to him. Stability built on misery isn't strength, it's stagnation. If your structures can only survive by denying people the right to love freely, maybe those structures deserve to be challenged. The chamber held its collective breath. No human had ever addressed the High Alpha so directly, let alone challenged his fundamental assumptions about werewolf society. Alexander studied Ethan with the patient attention of a predator evaluating potential prey. You speak of love as if it's the highest good, he said finally. But what about duty? Responsibility? The sacrifices necessary to keep our people alive in a world that would destroy us if it knew we existed? I speak of love as if it's the foundation everything else should be built on, Ethan replied steadily. Strong bonds create strong packs. Happy wolves make better leaders, better parents, better guardians of your people's future. And if those bonds cross species lines? If they threaten the genetic purity our survival depends on? Sera felt Ethan's flash of anger at the implied insult, but his voice remained level. Then maybe survival isn't worth the price you're asking people to pay for it. The words hung in the air like thrown gauntlets. Around the chamber, Alphas shifted restlessly, torn between their automatic submission to the High Alpha and their growing recognition that the human might be right. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes distant with memory and calculation. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Do you know why I'm called the High Alpha, Mr. Cross? Because you're the strongest, Ethan replied, though uncertainty flickered in his green eyes. No, Alexander said with a slight smile. Because I'm the oldest. I've seen our people evolve from scattered tribes to organized packs to the carefully structured society we have today. I've watched us adapt to survive, compromise to persevere, sacrifice individual desires for collective safety. His expression grew distant. I've also watched us grow rigid, closed off, so focused on survival that we forgot what we were trying to survive for. The admission sent shock waves through the assembled alphas. Several looked genuinely stunned that their supreme leader would voice such doubts. 50 years ago I would have condemned your mating without hesitation, Alexander continued, his gaze moving between Sera and Ethan. The risks would have seemed too great, the precedent too dangerous. But 50 years ago our people were dying, not from external threats but from internal decay. From leadership that had forgotten how to inspire, instead of merely command. He turned to address the full council, his voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. We've become so afraid of change that we've stopped growing. So committed to tradition that we've forgotten tradition is supposed to serve life, not the other way around. Hi Alpha, Alpha Blackwood said carefully. Surely you're not suggesting we abandon centuries of successful social organization for the romantic idealism of. I'm suggesting, Alexander cut him off with gentle but unmistakable authority, that maybe it's time we remembered what our ancestors actually wrote into the original laws. Not the interpretations we've layered on over the centuries, but the fundamental principles they meant to establish. He moved to the chamber's center, where ancient words were carved into the stone floor in scripts older than modern civilization. The first law, he read aloud. Let hearts choose their bonds, for love given freely strengthens all connections. The words seemed to ring with power in the sacred space, reminding everyone present of foundations they'd built upon but gradually forgotten. The second law, Alexander continued. Let no wolf be bound against their will, for bonds forged in freedom endure while those born of force crumble. Several alphas shifted uncomfortably as the implications hit home. How many of their own matings violated that fundamental principle? And the third law, Alexander's voice grew stronger still. Let the Luna bloodlines guide the evolution of our bonds, for they carry the wisdom to distinguish truth from convenience, love from mere attraction. He looked directly at Sera, and she felt something pass between them, recognition, perhaps, or the acknowledgement of responsibility being passed from one generation to the next. Sera Nightwood, he said formally, by the authority vested in me as High Alpha of all North American packs, and in accordance with laws written by your own ancestor, I recognize your mating bond with Ethan Cross as valid, legal, and binding. The chamber erupted in shocked voices, some celebrating, others protesting, all of them stunned by this unexpected turn of events. Furthermore, Alexander continued, his voice cutting through the chaos, I hereby establish the position of Luna Counselor to be filled by Sera Nightwood, with the authority to evaluate contested matings and recommend dissolutions where bonds were formed through force rather than choice. You can't, Alpha Blackwood started to protest. I can and I have, Alexander replied with finality. The position is established by original law, validated by bloodline authority, and confirmed by High Alpha decree. Any who would challenge this decision may face me directly. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. No Alpha, no matter how powerful, would risk single combat with the High Alpha over a political disagreement. Sera felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers as the magnitude of what had just happened sank in. They'd won, not just the right to be together, but official recognition and the authority to help others find the same freedom they'd fought for. The council is dismissed, Alexander announced. Let all packs know that the old laws have been reaffirmed and will be enforced. Let love guide our bonds and freedom strengthen our connections. As the alphas began filing out of the chamber, some bitter, others hopeful, all of them processing this fundamental shift in their world, Alexander approached Sera and Ethan with an expression of quiet satisfaction. Congratulations, he said simply. You've just started a revolution. Thank you, Sera managed, still overwhelmed by the speed of their victory. But why? Why support us when it would have been so much easier to maintain the status quo? Alexander's smile was tinged with ancient sadness. Because I've lived long enough to know that love deferred is life denied. And our people deserve better than mere survival, they deserve the chance to flourish. He paused at the chamber's threshold, looking back with eyes that had seen too much history. Use your power wisely, Luna Counselor. The freedom to choose is precious precisely because it can be lost so easily. Then he was gone, leaving Sera and Ethan alone in the ancient chamber where everything had changed. They'd won their right to love freely. Now came the harder task of helping an entire species learn to do the same. Chapter 18, Hearts in Battle. 6 months after the Council's historic decision, Sera stood in the converted conference room that served as her official office, reviewing case files that represented the hopes and fears of wolves across the continent. The establishment of the Luna Counselor position had unleashed a flood of requests, some from wolves seeking dissolution of loveless political matings, others from those hoping to gain recognition for non-traditional bonds. Each file represented a life, a heart, a choice that had been denied for too long. Another 3 requests came in today, Elena Rivers said, entering with an armload of new paperwork. She'd accepted the position of deputy counselor, bringing her decades of wisdom to bear on the delicate work of evaluating bond authenticity. 2 forced matings from the Eastern Territories and 1 unusual case from California. Sera looked up from the file she'd been studying. A heartbreaking account of 2 wolves from rival packs whose true bond had been discovered after they'd already been mated to others for political convenience. Unusual how? A human woman claiming her werewolf mate, Elena replied with a slight smile. Seems your precedent is inspiring others to challenge the species barrier from the other direction. The irony wasn't lost on Sera. For decades, werewolf law had forbidden both humans claiming werewolves and werewolves claiming humans. The Treaty of Submission had been very clear about maintaining separation between species. Now, 6 months after her own mating had shattered those precedents, the floodgates were opening in ways no one had anticipated. How many is that now? Sera asked, making a note in her journal. 17 cross-species bond claims in 6 months, Elena replied. And that's just the ones brave enough to file officially. Who knows how many others are waiting to see what happens to the pioneers? A soft knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Come in, Sera called, expecting another petitioner or perhaps Ethan returning from his consultation with the pack's agricultural committee. Instead, Kieran Blackthorne entered, his familiar presence filling the room with carefully controlled energy. In the months since the council's decision, their relationship had evolved from strained courtesy to something approaching genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and the shared goal of helping their pack adapt to changing times. Sera? He greeted formally, then nodded to Elena. Deputy Counselor. I hope I'm not interrupting important work. Always important, Sera replied with a slight smile, but never too important for you. What's on your mind, Alpha? Kieran settled into the chair across from her desk, his expression thoughtful. I've been monitoring the changes in pack dynamics since the Luna Counselor program began operations. The results are interesting. Good interesting or bad interesting? Both, Kieran admitted. Pack bonds are definitely stronger, where wolves have been given the freedom to choose their mates. Morale is up, productivity is higher, there's less internal conflict and more cooperation. The wolves who form genuine pair bonds are happier, more stable, better parents. Elena nodded approvingly. That matches what we're seeing in other territories. Love really does strengthen pack structure when it's freely chosen. However, Kieran continued, his tone growing more serious, we're also seeing significant social disruption in some areas. 3 pack alliances have dissolved in the past month when Luna Counselor evaluations revealed that the matings binding them were hollow. 2 alphas have been challenged by pack members who felt their leaders were hypocrites for maintaining political matings while preaching about choice and freedom. Sera felt the familiar weight of unintended consequences settling on her shoulders. Every choice had ripple effects, and the power to reshape werewolf mating culture inevitably disrupted established hierarchies built on those matings. "Any serious violence?" she asked. "One death so far," Kieran reported grimly. Alpha Jonathan Greymane was killed by his own son when Luna counselor evaluation revealed that Greymane's mating to the boy's mother had been forced. Apparently, the son had suspected for years, but having it confirmed triggered something primal. The news hit Sera like a physical blow. She'd known that changing fundamental social structures would create instability, but she'd hoped to minimize the casualties through careful, gradual reform. "How's his pack handling it?" "They've accepted his son as the new Alpha, and he's already requested Luna counselor evaluation for every mating in his territory." Kieran's expression was unreadable. He wants to start fresh, build a pack culture based entirely on freely chosen bonds. "That's ambitious," Elena said carefully. "That's revolutionary," Kieran corrected. "And it's happening faster than anyone anticipated." The Luna Counselor program was supposed to be a gradual reform process, but it's triggering fundamental upheaval across werewolf society. Sera leaned back in her chair, processing the magnitude of what they'd set in motion. "Are you suggesting I slow down the evaluations? Be more conservative in my recommendations?" "I'm suggesting," Kieran said carefully, "that we need to be prepared for the possibility that some wolves will choose violence over evolution. That some alphas would rather fight than admit their authority is built on lies." Before Sera could respond, the sound of commotion from the corridor outside made all three wolves look up in alarm. Raised voices, the scuff of boots on stone, the particular kind of tension that preceded either celebration or catastrophe. The door burst open without ceremony, and Marcus Nightwood rushed in with the kind of urgency that made Sera's wolf leap to full alert. "Uncle?" She was on her feet immediately, reading the grim news in his expression. "What's wrong?" "Alpha Victor Bloodmoon is here," Marcus said without preamble. "With 50 warriors from the northern wastes. He's demanding an audience with the Luna counselor, and he's not interested in waiting for an appointment." Sera felt ice crystallize in her veins. Victor Bloodmoon was one of the most traditionalist alphas in North America, a wolf who'd built his power on absolute adherence to the old ways. His pack still practiced arranged matings for children as young as 14, still maintained strict hierarchies that treated females as property to be traded between dominant males. If he was here with 50 warriors, it wasn't for a peaceful consultation. "What does he want?" Kieran asked, his own tension ratcheting up as he processed the implications. "To challenge the Luna Counselor program directly," Marcus replied. "He claims Sera's power is an abomination that threatens the natural order, and he's demanding trial by combat to prove werewolf society should return to traditional mating practices." The challenge was both inevitable and impossible. Victor was renowned for his skill in battle, a warrior who'd never lost single combat in over 30 years of alpha leadership. But more than that, he represented the backlash Sera had feared, the violent resistance of those who profited from the old system. "I have to face him," Sera said quietly, her mind already calculating strategies and odds. "If I refuse, he'll claim the Luna Counselor program is built on cowardice rather than conviction." "And if you accept?" Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Then I fight the most dangerous alpha in the Northern Territories, while wearing a target painted by every traditionalist who wants to see me fail." Sera's laugh was bitter. "Either way, everything we've built is at risk." Kieran stood slowly, his expression shifting to something Sera had rarely seen, protective fury on behalf of someone other than himself. "Not everything. And not if I have anything to say about it." "Kieran? You've given our people the chance to choose love over duty," he said firmly. "You've shown them that strength comes from connection, not dominance. That makes you worth fighting for, Sera. That makes this cause worth defending." The weight of his support, his friendship, His genuine transformation from possessive alpha to protective ally made Sera's throat tighten with emotion. But support wouldn't be enough if she couldn't match Victor Bloodmoon's legendary skill in combat. The revolution they'd started was about to face its first real test. And failure would cost more than just their lives, it would cost every wolf who dared to dream of choosing their own fate. Chapter 19: The Price of Defiance. The challenge circle had been carved into the earth behind the pack compound, its ancient boundaries marked with stones worn smooth by centuries of ritual combat. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting everything in shades of blood and gold, wolves gathered in silence to witness what might be the end of the Luna Counselor program before it had truly begun. Sera stood at the circle's eastern edge, wearing the simple leather fighting clothes that would allow maximum mobility. Across from her, Victor Bloodmoon waited with the patient stillness of a predator who'd never known defeat. He was massive even by Alpha standards, nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that could have supported a small building and hands that looked capable of crushing stone. But it was his eyes that made Sera's wolf whimper with instinctive fear. They were the pale blue of winter ice, empty of warmth or mercy or any emotion except cold calculation. This was a wolf who'd killed not out of passion or necessity, but because dominance required the occasional demonstration of absolute power. Sera Nightwood, Victor said, his voice carrying the accent of the far northern territories, where civilization grew thin and survival demanded brutality. Luna Counselor. Corrupter of our people's sacred traditions. Victor Bloodmoon, Sera replied evenly, though her heart hammered against her ribs with the steady rhythm of approaching doom. Alpha of the Frost Pack. Defender of traditions that were outdated when our grandparents were pups. His smile was all teeth and winter wind. You think your modern ideas can stand against centuries of proven strength? You think the love of a fragile human makes you worthy to reshape our world? I think love makes us all stronger than we are alone, Sera said, her eyes finding Ethan in the crowd. He stood with Elena and Marcus, his face tight with worry but his green eyes blazing with fierce pride. I think the future belongs to those brave enough to choose it. Victor's laugh was like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Then let us see if your future can survive the present. Elena Rivers stepped into the circle, her ancient voice carrying the weight of ceremony and law. The challenge has been issued and accepted. Combat will be in wolf form, to submission or death. The victor's position on Luna Counselor, Sera Nightwood's fitness to serve, will be accepted as pack law. She looked between the two combatants, her pale eyes sad with the knowledge of what was to come. Fight with honor. Die with dignity. Let the strongest vision for our people's future emerge victorious. Sera began her shift even as Elena spoke, her human form dissolving into something larger and more dangerous. Her wolf was magnificent, silver-touched black fur that gleamed like moonlight on water, amber eyes that burned with intelligence and determination, a frame built for both speed and power. But Victor's transformation was something from nightmares. His wolf was enormous, easily twice Sera's size, with fur the color of old blood and scars that spoke of countless battles won. When he snarled, his teeth gleamed like ivory daggers in the dying light. They circled each other in the ancient pattern, testing for weakness, reading the subtle signs that would determine survival or death. Victor moved with surprising grace for his size, each step calculated to display his overwhelming physical advantage. Sera knew she couldn't match him for raw power. Her only hope lay in speed, strategy, and the desperate love that burned in her chest like a living flame. She had to survive this. Had to win. Because everything she'd fought for, the Luna Counselor program, the right to choose love over tradition, the future she'd promised Ethan, hung in the balance. Victor struck first, his massive frame moving with deceptive speed as he lunged for her throat. Sera twisted aside at the last possible second, feeling his claws whistle past her neck. Her counterattack caught him in the shoulder, drawing first blood. The wound barely slowed him. Victor spun with liquid grace and backhanded her with a paw that sent her tumbling across the circle. Pain exploded through her ribs as she hit the ground hard, stars dancing across her vision. Is this the great Luna who would reshape our world? Victor's mental voice carried the cold amusement of a predator playing with wounded prey. Is this the strength that convinced the council to create new laws? Sera forced herself back to her feet, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her tongue. Around the circle, she could hear the worried murmurs of her supporters, the satisfied growls of those who'd opposed her from the beginning. But she could also hear something else, Ethan's voice calling her name with desperate love and unshakable faith. The sound gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. "I don't have to be the strongest wolf here," Sera replied, settling into a defensive crouch. "I just have to be the one who refuses to give up." Their second exchange was even more brutal than the first. Victor's claws raked across her side, opening wounds that would have felled a lesser wolf. But Sera's return strike found the soft spot behind his ear, and for the first time the massive alpha stumbled. They separated, both bleeding now, both breathing hard. But Victor's wounds were already healing, while Sera's remained stubbornly open. The math was simple and cruel. She was running out of time, running out of strength, running out of options. "Yield," Victor commanded, his mental voice crackling with alpha authority. "Yield and I will make your death swift. Continue this foolishness, and I will tear you apart piece by piece while your human watches." Sera's response was to launch herself at his throat with every ounce of speed and fury she possessed. If she was going to die, she would die fighting, not for her own life but for the future she believed in. Victor met her charge head-on, and what followed was a display of violence that had several younger wolves turning away in horror. They rolled across the circle in a tangle of fur and fang, each seeking the killing strike that would end the battle permanently. Sera managed to lock her jaws around Victor's foreleg, her teeth seeking the artery that would cripple him. But his response was devastating, claws raking down her spine, opening wounds that painted the consecrated earth with her blood. She held on with desperate determination, even as agony threatened to black out her vision. This was her chance, possibly her only chance, to prove that heart could triumph over mere strength. But Victor was too experienced, too battle-hardened to be defeated by desperation alone. With a surge of power that spoke of decades ruling through fear, he broke her hold and sent her crashing into the circle's stone boundary. Sera hit the ancient markers with bone-jarring force, her wolf form crumpling as pain exploded through her body. When she tried to rise, her legs refused to support her weight. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading in the twilight. "It's over," Victor declared, standing over her fallen form like a conqueror surveying his prize. "Yield, Luna Counselor, and accept that some traditions exist because they are true." Sera looked up at him through eyes clouded with pain and exhaustion. She could taste defeat like copper in her mouth, could feel her strength ebbing with each labored breath. Everything she'd fought for was slipping away, lost to the brutal mathematics of physical power. But then her gaze found Ethan again, and what she saw there stopped her heart. He wasn't watching her with pity or grief, or the resigned acceptance of loss. His green eyes blazed with the same fierce love she'd seen on their first night together, the same unshakable faith that had carried him through impossible trials. He believed in her. Even now, even with defeat staring them both in the face, he believed in her strength. And suddenly, Sera remembered something Elena had told her years ago, back when she was still learning to navigate the complex hierarchies of pack politics. "True power doesn't come from being the strongest wolf in the room," the old healer had said. "It comes from being the one who inspires others to be strong." Sera had spent this entire fight trying to match Victor's physical prowess, trying to beat him at a game where he held every advantage. But that wasn't where her real strength lay. Her power had never been about dominance or brute force. It was about connection. About bringing out the best in others. About proving that love could be a source of strength rather than weakness. And in that moment of clarity, Sera felt something awakening deep in her bloodline. A power that had nothing to do with claws or fangs or the ability to intimidate through fear. The power to choose. The power to inspire. The power to transform hearts and minds through the simple act of refusing to surrender hope. "No," she said clearly, forcing herself back to her feet despite the agony radiating through her broken body. "I don't yield." Victor's pale eyes widened with surprise. "You're beaten." Another strike will kill you. Maybe, Sera agreed, blood streaming from her wounds but her voice growing stronger with each word. But I'd rather die fighting for a future worth living than survive by accepting a world that crushes love under the weight of tradition. She lifted her head to address the assembled pack, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Look around you. See the faces of your packmates, your friends, your family. How many of them are trapped in matings that serve politics instead of their hearts? How many have sacrificed their happiness on the altar of tradition and necessity? Murmurs rippled through the crowd as wolves began to really look at each other, to see the quiet desperation hidden behind masks of obedient submission. Victor Bloodmoon offers you the safety of the known, Sera continued, her amber eyes blazing with conviction. The comfort of never having to question, never having to change, never having to risk your heart on the possibility that love might be worth more than security. She turned to face Victor directly, no longer seeing him as an opponent, but as another soul trapped by the very system he was trying to defend. But I offer you something else. The chance to be more than you were yesterday. The hope that tomorrow might be better than today. The faith that love, real, chosen, freely given love, can make us all stronger than we ever imagined possible. The massive Alpha stared at her, with something that might have been uncertainty flickering in his pale eyes. Pretty words, Luna counselor. But words don't change the fundamental nature of strength and weakness. Don't they? Sera smiled through her pain, and suddenly the wounds covering her body seemed less important than the light blazing from within. Then explain to me how a fragile human managed to defeat one of the strongest alphas in North America. Explain how love gave Ethan Cross the courage to face certain death for the chance to claim his mate. Victor's growl held less conviction than before. Luck? Desperation. A fluke that proves nothing. Or maybe, Sera said softly, it proves that the old ways of measuring strength are incomplete. Maybe it proves that heart matters as much as muscle, that determination can triumph over dominance, that love really is the most powerful force in any world. She looked around the circle again, her gaze touching every face in the crowd. I can't promise you easy answers. I can't promise that choosing love over duty will always be safe or simple or free from pain. But I can promise you this, I will fight for your right to choose. I will stand between you and any force that would deny you the chance to follow your hearts. Even if it kills me. The silence that followed her words was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through ancient pines. Then from somewhere in the crowd came the sound of slow applause. It was Ethan, of course. Her human mate, clapping with steady determination despite the tears streaming down his face. One by one others joined him, first Elena and Marcus, then the progressive alphas who'd supported her from the beginning, then pack members whose hearts had been touched by her words. Even some of Victor's supporters began to applaud, their rigid certainty cracking under the weight of her simple, powerful truth. Victor looked around the circle with growing uncertainty, his pale eyes reflecting something that might have been fear. Not fear of death or defeat, but fear of change, of a world where strength was measured by different standards than the ones he'd lived by his entire life. This proves nothing, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Sentiment and pretty speeches don't change the laws of nature. No, Sera agreed, limping toward him with slow, painful steps. But they can change the laws we choose to live by. They can transform us from beasts driven only by instinct into something greater, beings capable of choice, of growth, of love. She stopped just outside his reach, her broken body swaying but her amber eyes steady and sure. I don't want to destroy the old ways entirely, Victor. Structure has its place, hierarchy serves important functions, strength will always matter. But there has to be room for other kinds of power too. Room for compassion and choice, and the radical idea that every wolf deserves the chance to find their own path to happiness. Victor stared down at her for a long moment, this battered Luna who refused to stay defeated, this broken wolf who somehow blazed brighter than any alpha he'd ever faced. You're asking me to betray everything I've ever believed, he said quietly. I'm asking you to expand it, Sera replied. To consider that maybe strength comes in more forms than just the ability to dominate others. To wonder if the ultimate expression of power might be knowing when to step aside and let love grow. The massive Alpha was silent for so long that the watching crowd began to grow restless. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My mate," he said, and for the first time Sera heard pain beneath his cold control. "She was chosen for me by the pack elders. Strong bloodline, perfect temperament, everything an Alpha's Luna should be. But," Sera prompted gently. "But she dreamed of another. A simple pack member, kind and gentle and utterly unsuitable by traditional standards. She died bearing my son, and her last words." Victor's voice broke slightly. "Her last words were his name. Not mine. After 20 years of mating, she died calling for the love she'd never been allowed to claim." The admission hung in the air like a physical thing, raw and painful and achingly honest. Around the circle, wolves who'd known Victor only as an implacable force of traditional authority struggled to reconcile that image with the broken man before them. "I'm sorry," Sera said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I'm so sorry for your loss. For her loss. For all the losses that could have been prevented if we'd been brave enough to choose differently." Victor's pale eyes met hers, and she saw decades of buried grief reflected there. "If I yield this challenge," he said slowly, "if I accept your vision of a future where love matters more than bloodlines, what happens to wolves like me? What happens to those who've built their lives on the old certainties?" "You find new ones," Sera said simply. "You discover that being strong enough to protect what you love is more important than being strong enough to take what you want. You learn that the ultimate expression of leadership is creating a world where those who follow you can be happier than you've been able to be." She extended one bloodied paw toward him, an offer of connection rather than dominance. "Help me build that world, Victor. Help me prove that we can honor the past while still growing into something better." For a moment that stretched like eternity, the massive Alpha stared at her outstretched paw. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched it with his own. "I yield," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the circle. "I yield the challenge, and acknowledge Luna Counselor Sera Nightwood's right to reshape our understanding of strength and love." The crowd erupted in howls of celebration and confusion, the sound echoing off the mountains like the birth cry of a new world. But Sera barely heard them. Her vision was graying at the edges, her strength finally failing as blood loss and exhaustion caught up with her. She felt herself falling, felt strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. Ethan's scent surrounded her, familiar and beloved, as he cradled her against his chest. "You did it," he whispered against her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "You beautiful, impossible, magnificent woman. You actually did it." Sera managed a smile, despite the pain radiating through her body. "We did it," she corrected weakly. "None of this would have been possible without you believing in me first." As Elena and the pack healers rushed to tend her wounds, as the crowd gradually dispersed to process what they'd witnessed, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Sera held onto two certainties. They had won more than just a challenge tonight. They had won the right to dream of a future where love was stronger than fear, where choice mattered more than tradition, where even the most broken hearts could heal given time and courage and hope. And she had proven something she'd always suspected but never dared believe, that sometimes love really was powerful enough to change the world. Chapter 20: New Dawn, New Pack. 6 months after the challenge that nearly cost Sera her life, the pack compound had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The rigid hierarchies that had once governed every interaction had softened into something more flexible, more humane. Wolves still respected strength and leadership, but they also valued compassion, wisdom, and the radical idea that happiness might be as important as duty. Sera stood on the balcony of her new office, the Luna Counselor headquarters that had been built in the months following her victory over Victor Bloodmoon. Below her, the compound buzzed with activity that would have been unthinkable a year ago. In the central courtyard, a group of young wolves practiced combat techniques under Kieran's watchful eye. But mixed among the traditional werewolf students were humans, partners and mates who'd chosen to learn alongside their supernatural loved ones, rather than remaining separate and vulnerable. Near the training grounds, Elena Rivers tended a healing garden that had become a focal point for the entire community. Wolves and humans worked side by side, planting herbs and flowers while Elena shared ancient wisdom about the connections between all living things. And in the distance, clearly visible through the forest canopy, smoke rose from the chimney of the cottage where Ethan had finally convinced her to make their home. It was smaller than her former chambers in the main compound, but it was theirs, chosen rather than assigned, shaped by love rather than obligation. Admiring your handiwork? Kieran's voice from behind her carried warm amusement, rather than the cold authority she remembered from their old relationship. Sera turned to smile at the man who'd become not just her alpha, but her genuine friend. The months since their confrontation had been good to him. His amber eyes held a peace she'd never seen before, and his massive frame radiated confidence without the underlying tension that had once made him dangerous to be around. Our handiwork, she corrected. None of this would have been possible without your support. Support hell, Kieran laughed, settling beside her against the balcony railing. You dragged us all kicking and screaming into the 21st century. I just had the good sense to stop fighting the inevitable. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their people navigate this new world they'd helped create. It wasn't perfect, change was messy and difficult and sometimes painful. But it was theirs, shaped by choice and nurtured by hope. Speaking of the inevitable, Kieran said with studied casualness, I have news. Something in his tone made Sera study his face more carefully. What kind of news? The kind that involves a certain pack member who shall remain nameless, finally getting the courage to court the Luna he's been in love with since childhood. Sera's eyebrows rose. Marcus finally asked Elena out? Last night, over dinner in town. Apparently he's been planning it for months but kept losing his nerve. Kieran's grin was boyishly delighted. She said yes, by the way. They're thinking about a mating ceremony this fall. The news filled Sera with warm satisfaction. Elena Rivers deserved happiness, deserved to be loved by someone who saw past her healer's wisdom to the woman underneath. And Marcus had been alone too long, carrying the weight of raising an orphaned niece while neglecting his own heart. That's wonderful, she said sincerely. They'll be good for each other. Speaking of being good for each other, Kieran's expression grew more serious. How are you and Ethan adjusting to everything? It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. The Luna Counselor program had been a spectacular success. Requests for services came in daily from packs across North America, and several international delegations had expressed interest in adapting the model for their own territories. But success came with pressures that neither Sera nor Ethan had fully anticipated. Some days are easier than others, Sera admitted honestly. The travel is hard on him. Human bodies weren't designed to keep up with werewolf schedules. And there are still those who see our mating as an aberration that needs to be corrected. The death threats have decreased significantly since Victor started publicly supporting the program, Sera said with a slight smile. It's amazing how quickly opposition fades when the most traditional alpha in North America endorses your vision. Victor Bloodmoon had indeed become one of their most unlikely allies. After yielding the challenge, he'd returned to his northern territory and quietly begun implementing changes that had shocked his pack. Forced matings were no longer tolerated. Wolves were encouraged to form bonds based on genuine compatibility rather than political advantage. And perhaps most surprisingly, the massive alpha had stepped aside as leader, passing authority to his son while remaining as an elder advisor. He found someone, Kieran said quietly, reading her thoughts with the perception that came from years of friendship. A widow from the coastal territories, gentle and kind and everything his first mate should have been allowed to be. They're talking about a ceremony this winter. Good for him, Sera said, meaning it completely. Victor deserved the happiness he'd been denied for so long. They all did. And the council? Any word on expansion funding? Approved yesterday, Sera replied with satisfaction. We'll be able to establish Luna Counselor offices in 12 additional territories by next spring. Full funding for staff, facilities, and protection details. The protection details were a necessary precaution. Not all wolves had embraced the new paradigm with Victor's dramatic conversion. Conservative factions still viewed the program as a threat to natural order, and several attempts had been made to eliminate key personnel through violence rather than debate. "How's Ethan handling the security concerns?" Kieran asked, genuine worry in his voice. Sera's expression softened with love and pride. "Better than I expected. He's been working with Marcus on defensive techniques, learning to protect himself without relying entirely on others for safety. And he started teaching classes." "Teaching what?" "Human-werewolf relationship dynamics. Helping mixed couples navigate the practical challenges of cross-species bonding." Sera's smile grew wider. "He's become quite popular, actually. Turns out a lot of wolves are curious about human perspectives on love and partnership." "Who would have thought?" Kieran said with mock amazement. "A human might actually have something valuable to teach werewolves about relationships. Shocking, isn't it?" They laughed together, the sound carrying across the compound like music. Below them, the daily rhythms of pack life continued, but those rhythms now included things that would have been impossible a year ago. Human children playing with werewolf pups in the nursery. Mixed couples walking hand in hand through the gardens. Wolves seek counsel on matters of the heart, rather than simply accepting whatever arrangements their leaders deemed appropriate. "There's something else," Kieran said as their laughter faded. "Something I probably should have told you months ago." Sera tensed at his tone. "What?" "The night of the Blood Moon trials, when you chose Ethan over me, I was relieved. The admission came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding it back for months. Not angry, not heartbroken. Relieved." "Relieved?" "I'd spent so many years focused on claiming you as my mate that I never stopped to ask if that was what either of us actually wanted," Kieran explained, his amber eyes distant with memory. "I love the idea of you, the powerful Luna who would legitimize my rule and bear my heirs. But the real you, the woman underneath all that political symbolism? I never bothered to get to know her." Sera was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. "And now? Now I see why Ethan fell in love with you so quickly, so completely. Now I understand that what I felt was possession, not love. That I was trying to claim a prize, rather than cherish a partner." Kieran's smile was rueful but genuine. "You deserved better than that. You deserved someone who saw your heart before your bloodline." "We both deserved better than a mating built on obligation," Sera agreed softly. "I'm glad we figured that out before it was too late." "Are you happy?" Kieran asked, echoing the question Ethan had posed in his garden so many months ago. "Really, truly happy?" Sera considered the question seriously, taking inventory of her life as it was now, rather than as she'd once imagined it might be. She was Luna Counselor for territories spanning half a continent, responsible for programs that were literally reshaping werewolf society. The work was demanding, often dangerous, and frequently exhausting. But every morning she woke up in the arms of a man who loved her not for what she could do for him, but for who she was at her core. Every day she helped other souls find the courage to choose love over duty. Every night she fell asleep knowing that she was building a world where future generations wouldn't have to sacrifice their hearts for the sake of tradition. "Yes," she said finally, the word carrying absolute certainty. "I'm happy. Not constantly, not without challenges, but yes. For the first time in my life, I'm truly happy." "Good," Kieran said with fierce satisfaction. "That's all I ever really wanted for you, you know. Even when I was being an ass about claiming you, some part of me wanted you to be happy." "I know," Sera said softly. "And for what it's worth, I think you're going to be happy too. When you find your real mate, not a political arrangement but a genuine connection, you're going to understand why I fought so hard for the right to choose." Kieran's expression grew thoughtful. Actually, there might be someone. A visiting Alpha from the European territories, here to study our programs. She's interesting. Interesting how? Smart. Independent. Completely unimpressed by traditional displays of dominance. Kieran's smile was self-deprecating. She laughed at me when I tried the whole intimidating Alpha routine. Actually laughed, like I was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever seen. And that appeals to you? Terrifies and thrills me in equal measure, Kieran admitted. For the first time in my life, I'm having to work to earn someone's respect, rather than simply commanding it. It's challenging. Good, Sera said with satisfaction. Challenge builds character. A comfortable silence settled between them, as they watched the sun climb higher in the morning sky. Somewhere in the compound a phone was ringing. Probably another pack requesting Luna counselor services, or a mixed couple seeking guidance, or a journalist wanting to write about the werewolf revolution that was spreading across North America. I should go, Sera said reluctantly. Full schedule today, and Ethan's making lunch for the new staff orientation. Go, Kieran agreed. Build your better world, Luna counselor. Just remember to take care of yourself in the process. I will, Sera promised. We all will. As she headed back toward her office to collect the files for her afternoon appointments, Sera caught sight of a familiar figure walking through the gardens. Ethan moved among the flowers with the same gentle care he brought to everything he touched, stopping occasionally to deadhead spent blooms or water-thirsty plants. He looked up as she approached, his green eyes lighting with the same joy she'd seen on their first meeting. After all this time, after all they'd been through, he still looked at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe. How was your meeting with Kieran? He asked, straightening from the rosebush he'd been tending. Productive. Enlightening. Sera moved into his arms with the fluid grace of long practice, settling against his chest like a puzzle piece finding its match. He's happy for us, you know. Really, genuinely happy. I'm glad, Ethan said, his arms tightening around her. He's a good man underneath all that alpha posturing. He deserves to find what we have. What do we have? Sera asked, curious about his perspective. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his hands tracing gentle patterns along her spine. Everything, he said finally. We have everything that matters, love that chose itself, work that fulfills us, a future we're building together one choice at a time. Even when it's hard? Even when the death threats arrive, or the schedule gets overwhelming, or we're too tired to remember why we started this crusade in the first place? Especially then, Ethan replied with absolute certainty. Because that's when we remember that we're not just building a life together, we're building a legacy. Something that will outlast us both, and make the world a little better for everyone who comes after. Sera lifted her head to study his face, still amazed by the depth of love and conviction she found there. No regrets? About giving up your quiet life in the garden for all this chaos? Only one, Ethan said solemnly. Sera's heart clenched. What? I regret that it took me so long to find you, he replied with a smile that made her knees weak. I regret all those years I spent not knowing that someone like you existed in the world. Sentimental fool, Sera accused, though her voice was thick with emotion. You're sentimental fool, Ethan corrected, leaning down to brush his lips against hers in a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. Around them the garden bloomed with impossible beauty, flowers that shouldn't have thrived in this climate, plants that defied conventional wisdom about what could grow where. It was a testament to the power of patient nurturing, of refusing to accept limitations, of believing that love could make even the impossible take root and flourish. Just like everything else they'd built together. Come on, Sera said, pulling back reluctantly. We have a world to change. Lead the way, Luna counselor, Ethan replied with a grin. I'll follow you anywhere. Hand in hand they walked toward the future they'd chosen together. A future where love was stronger than law, where choice mattered more than tradition, where two souls from different worlds had proven that sometimes the most impossible bonds were also the most unbreakable. The new dawn was just beginning. Epilogue, after the storm. 10 years after the Nightwood Accords. The letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, carried by a young courier who seemed barely old enough to be traveling between packs alone. Sera accepted it with curiosity, noting the formal seal that marked official correspondence from the Continental Werewolf Council. She'd been expecting this particular communication for months, ever since rumors began circulating about a major restructuring of supernatural governance. The Accords had been so successful that other species, vampires, fae, shapeshifters of various kinds, were beginning to demand similar protections for cross-species relationships and individual choice. "What is it?" Ethan asked, looking up from the lesson plans he was preparing for the next semester's advanced mediation course. "An invitation," Sera said, scanning the formal language with growing amazement. "The council is forming a new position, Director of Interspecies Relations. They want me to consider accepting the appointment." Ethan's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Director? That would make you one of the most powerful supernatural beings on the continent." "It would make us," Sera corrected, noting the specific clause that authorized her to choose her own staff and advisors. "They're not just offering me the position, they're acknowledging that our partnership approach is the model they want to use going forward." She set the letter aside and moved to the window, looking out at the community they'd built from nothing more than hope and determination. The valley now housed over 300 families, with a waiting list of applicants that grew longer each month. Their success had sparked similar settlements across North America, each one tailored to local needs, but based on the same principles of acceptance and choice. "Are you interested?" Ethan asked, joining her at the window. Sera considered the question carefully. The position would mean significant responsibility, extensive travel, and the chance to influence policy on a continental scale. It would also mean leaving the day-to-day work of counseling that had become her passion. "I'm interested in the possibilities," she said finally. "Imagine what we could accomplish with official authority behind us. Standardized protections for all mixed couples, education programs for traditional communities, legal frameworks that recognize the full spectrum of supernatural relationships." "It would also make us targets," Ethan pointed out pragmatically. "There are still plenty of people who see what we've accomplished as a threat to natural order." "There are," Sera agreed. "But there are more who see it as proof that love really can triumph over prejudice, that individuals really can choose their own destinies without destroying the communities they love." As if summoned by their conversation, Luna appeared in the doorway, now 16 and possessed of the kind of quiet confidence that came from growing up secure in her identity. She'd inherited her mother's strength and her father's empathy, combining them into a personality that drew people like flowers toward sunlight. "Mom? Dad? The Council of Teens wants to know if we can expand the mentorship program next semester," she said, referring to the student organization that had formed to help newly arrived mixed families adjust to community life. "We've got 12 new applicants, and most of them are dealing with pretty complex integration issues." Sera smiled at her daughter's casual assumption that every problem had a solution, that every challenge could be met with determination and compassion. It was the worldview of someone who'd never been told her dreams were impossible, never been forced to choose between love and duty. "Tell them we'll find a way," Sera said. "We always do." After Luna left, Sera and Ethan returned to their consideration of the council's offer. Outside their window, the afternoon light painted the valley in shades of gold and amber, illuminating a scene that would have been unimaginable when they first met. Human and werewolf children played together in the community garden, their laughter mixing with the sound of construction as another housing development took shape on the hillside. Mixed couples walked hand in hand along the forest paths, no longer afraid to show their affection in public. Elderly pack members sat in comfortable conversation with human grandparents, sharing stories and wisdom across species lines. It was, Sera realized, what happiness looked like when allowed to flourish without constraint. "If we take the position," she said slowly, we could help create communities like this across the continent. Maybe across the world. And if we don't, we keep doing what we're doing here, helping one family at a time, building change from the ground up rather than from the top down. Ethan was quiet for several minutes, his green eyes thoughtful as he weighed possibilities and consequences. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet certainty that had first attracted her to him. The work matters more than the title, he said. Whether we're helping people from a council office or from our training center, the goal is the same, creating a world where everyone has the right to choose love over fear. So what do you think we should do? Ethan's smile was the same one that had changed her life in a moonlit garden over a decade ago, warm, confident, and full of love for the impossible dreamer he'd somehow convinced to be his wife. I think, he said, pulling her into his arms, that we should do what we've always done. Trust our hearts, stand together, and refuse to let anyone convince us that love isn't strong enough to change the world. Sera kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and devotion into the contact that had sparked a revolution. Around them, their community continued its quiet work of proving that different worlds could coexist, that ancient prejudices could be overcome, that sometimes the most radical act was simply choosing to love without apology. Whatever they decided about the council position, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, together. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but the new world they'd built in its wake was just beginning to bloom. In the distance, carried by the autumn wind, came the sound of wolves howling their joy to the setting sun, a song of pack bonds and chosen family, of traditions honored and barriers broken, of love that was strong enough to rewrite the rules of reality itself. And in her heart, Sera howled back her own song of gratitude for the impossible human who dared to love her, for the daughter who'd grown up free, and for the future they'd built together from nothing more than courage and an unshakable faith in the power of choice. The human had indeed defeated the Alpha, not through violence or conquest, but through the simple revolutionary act of proving that love could transform even the most ancient and rigid systems into something beautiful and new. Their story had become legend, but more importantly, it had become hope. And hope, once planted, had a way of growing into tomorrow. The end.